They called him the Butcher of Blackmoor, the alpha who bathed battlefields in crimson and wore cruelty like a crown. Tonight, Seraphine Vale would meet him, not as a guest, but as cargo, sold, shackled, payment for sins she didn't commit. The warriors dragging her through blood-soaked mud laughed about what their king did to Omegas, how he broke them, used them, discarded them like rotting meat. But when Kaelor Draven's molten gold eyes locked onto hers across that firelit wasteland, something impossible shattered the air between them. One word, one truth, one fate that would burn kingdoms to ash. Mate. What happens when this monster finds his soul? Watch until the end to see Seraphine's impossible choice, and smash that like button if you're ready for a love story written in blood and starlight. Drop your city in the comments below. The iron collar was too tight. Seraphine couldn't breathe properly, couldn't swallow without feeling the cold metal bite into her throat like a promise of worse things to come. Her wrists were bound behind her back with rope that had already worn her skin raw, and every stumbling step through the mud sent fresh jolts of pain up her spine from where they'd kicked her ribs 3 hours ago. Or was it 4? Time had become meaningless somewhere between her father's funeral pyre and the moment Cretan soldiers dragged her from her mother's screaming arms. "Keep moving, Omega trash!" The boot caught her between the shoulder blades. Seraphine pitched forward, barely catching herself before her face hit the ground. Mud splattered across her cheek, mixing with blood from her split lip. She could taste copper and dirt and her own humiliation. "I said move." The soldier, Garrett, she thought his name was, grabbed her hair and yanked her head back. His breath reeked of whiskey and rotted teeth. "Or do you want me to drag you the rest of the way? The Blackmoor bastards won't care if you arrive in pieces." Seraphine bit down on the inside of her cheek hard enough to draw more blood. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of hearing her cry, wouldn't let any of them see her break. Not the Credence warriors who'd sold her like livestock, not the Blackmoor savages waiting at the border, not even the Monster King himself when he decided what to do with damaged goods. She forced her legs to work, one foot in front of the other, following the line of torches that marked the edge of Credence territory. Behind her, 3 more soldiers laughed and passed a flask between them. Ahead, the land turned darker, wilder. The trees grew twisted and black, their branches reaching toward the blood-red sky like clawed fingers. Blackmoor territory, the kingdom of wolves and nightmares. "You know what they say about King Draven?" One of the soldiers, Marcus, the youngest one who'd almost looked sorry when they chained her, spoke too loud, his words slurring. "They say he killed his own father, tore out his throat with his bare hands when he was 16. I heard he keeps Omega slaves in his dungeons," Garrett added, his grip tightening in Seraphine's hair until her scalp screamed. "Uses them until they break, then feeds what's left to his wolves." "Both of you shut the fuck up." That was Commander Petros, the gray-haired bastard who'd negotiated her sale. "The king doesn't need to hear you spreading tavern gossip like washerwomen." "Which king?" Garrett laughed. "Ours, who sold her to settle her daddy's debt. Or theirs, who bought a broken Omega for the price of 3 grain wagons and safe passage through the northern pass." Seraphine's stomach turned. 3 grain wagons. That's what her life was worth. That's what 23 years of existence amounted to when your father gambled away everything he owned and then drank himself to death rather than face the consequences. The torches ahead grew brighter. Seraphine could make out shapes now, figures standing in a semicircle around a massive bonfire that painted the clearing in shades of amber and shadow. Blackmoor warriors. Even from a distance, she could feel the difference between them and the Credence soldiers. These men didn't slouch or stumble. They stood like carved stone, weapons glinting, eyes reflecting firelight like animals in the dark. "Remember," Petros hissed, yanking Seraphine to a halt 20 feet from the fire. "You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't look at anyone directly. You keep your Omega eyes down and your mouth shut, understand?" Seraphine didn't answer. Couldn't. The collar was crushing her windpipe. Petros slapped her. "I asked you a question." "Yes." The word came out broken, barely a whisper. "Yes, what?" "Yes, Commander." "Good girl." He shoved her forward, and she stumbled into the firelight like a sacrifice to hungry gods. "Now let's see if the Butcher King thinks you're worth what we paid for you." The heat from the bonfire hit her first, a wall of warmth that should have been comfort, but felt more like standing at the mouth of hell. Seraphine kept her eyes down like she'd been taught, watching mud and ash swirl around her bare feet. She could hear breathing, heavy, controlled, could smell leather and steel and something wild she couldn't name. "Commander Petros." The voice that spoke was deep and cold, edged with an accent that turned each word into a weapon. "You're late. Terrain was difficult, Lord Varric. We moved as fast as we could with cargo." Lord Varric. Not the king, then. Seraphine risked a glance upward through her matted hair. The man who'd spoken stood to the left of the bonfire, tall and lean, with dark hair pulled back from a face that might have been handsome, if not for the cruelty carved into every angle. His eyes, pale gray like winter ice, swept over her with the interest one might give a horse at market. "This is the debt payment?" Varric's lip curled. "Damaged goods, Petros. The agreement was for an Omega in good condition." "She's unbonded and untouched, my lord. A few bruises from transport, nothing more." "Unbonded?" Varric moved closer, circling her like a predator. "How old?" 23. 23 and unbonded." A low laugh. "What's wrong with her? Disease? Madness? Or is she simply so worthless that no alpha would claim her?" Seraphine's fingernails dug into her palms. She wanted to spit in his face, wanted to tell him that she'd refused every alpha who'd tried to buy her from her father, that she'd rather die alone than be owned by men like him, but the caller reminded her to stay silent, to survive. "Her father was protective," Petros said carefully. "Kept her isolated. She's untrained, but she's strong. Good bloodline. She'll serve well enough for whatever purpose your king requires." "Strong." Varric grabbed Seraphine's chin, forcing her head up. His fingers were cold and hard, and his eyes held nothing but calculation. "Let's see." He ripped her tunic down the shoulder, exposing the bruises on her collarbone, the rope burns on her wrists. Seraphine flinched, but didn't pull away. Couldn't. His grip was iron. "She's been beaten. Only enough to ensure compliance during transport, my lord." "And the collar? Standard precaution for unbonded Omegas. We can remove it once—" "Leave it!" A new voice cut through the clearing like a blade through silk. Deeper than Varric's, rougher, carrying weight that made every warrior in the clearing stand straighter. "Step away from her, brother." The world seemed to hold its breath. Varric released Seraphine's chin and stepped back, his expression unreadable. "As you wish, my king." Seraphine's heart hammered against her ribs. She kept her eyes down, but she could feel him approaching, could hear boots striking earth with measured precision, could smell smoke and pine and something darker, something that made her wolf stir for the first time in months, despite the silver-laced collar suppressing her. The boot stopped in front of her. Black leather, worn but well-maintained, buckles of what looked like actual silver, not the cheap alloy Credence used. She could see the hem of a long coat, dark fabric that blended with the shadows. "Look at me." It wasn't a request. Seraphine's body obeyed before her mind could catch up, her chin lifting, her gaze traveling up past the coat, past the broad chest and leather armor, past the strong jaw dark with stubble, until finally, golden eyes. Not amber, not brown gold, but true molten gold like the heart of a forge. They pinned her in place with an intensity that stole what little breath she had left. The man, the king, stood at least a foot taller than her, built like violence and barely restrained power. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, half tied back from a face that was all hard angles and old scars. A silver ring pierced his left eyebrow, another through his bottom lip. He looked like every nightmare her mother had warned her about, every monster from the stories meant to keep Omega children obedient. But his eyes, something in them made her wolf howl. Kaelor Draven stared at Seraphine Vale, and the world fractured. She saw his pupils dilate, saw his jaw clench so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek, saw his hands, large, scarred, deadly, curl into fists at his sides like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. The air between them thickened, charged with electricity that made every hair on her body stand on end. "No." The word left his mouth barely above a whisper, but it carried enough shock that his brother took a step forward. "Kaelor?" The king didn't answer, didn't move. He just stood there staring at Seraphine like she'd ripped his chest open and reached inside to grab his still beating heart. And Seraphine, God's helper, stared back, Because despite the collar, despite the silver burning into her skin, despite every logical thought screaming at her to look away, she couldn't. Something had hooked into her soul the moment their eyes met, something ancient and absolute and utterly terrifying. The word echoed in her mind like thunder rolling across mountains. Mate. This isn't possible. Kaylor's voice had gone rough, almost guttural. He turned to Petros with eyes that had shifted from gold to something closer to amber fire. You sold her? Petros cleared his throat. Payment for her father's debt, Your Majesty. As agreed. 3 grain wagons, and I asked you a question, Commander. Each word fell like a hammer strike. You sold her. Her father's estate was forfeit. She came with the property, as it were. She's not fucking property. The growl in Kaylor's voice made half the warriors reach for their weapons. He stopped himself, jaw working like he was physically biting back words. When he spoke again, his tone had gone deadly calm. Remove the collar. My king, with respect, she's unbonded and potentially dangerous. Varric started. Remove the collar. Kaylor's eyes never left Seraphine's face. Now! A Blackmoor warrior stepped forward, a massive man with a scarred face and hands like sledgehammers. He produced a key from his belt and moved behind Seraphine. She felt his fingers work the lock, felt the collar loosen, felt blessed relief as the silver fell away and air rushed back into her lungs. The moment the metal hit the ground, everything changed. Her wolf surged forward with a force that nearly drove her to her knees. She could breathe again, could feel again, could sense the world in colors and scents and textures that had been muted for hours. And through it all, one scent overwhelmed everything else. Smoke and pine and dark earth and something uniquely, impossibly him. Mate. Her wolf knew, had known from the first second their eyes met. This man, this monster king who killed his own father and bathed in the blood of his enemies, was hers, chosen by fate or the gods or whatever force bound alphas to omegas across all the known territories. And from the way Kaylor Draven was looking at her, his wolf knew too. Seraphine. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a curse tangled together. Your name is Seraphine. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Yes. How long have you known? She didn't pretend to misunderstand. Since you looked at me. And before? When they were transporting you, when they put that fucking collar on you and dragged you through the mud like an animal, did you feel anything? Any pull? Any sense that... He stopped again, his control fracturing at the edges. No, Seraphine whispered. Nothing. Not until you. Kaylor made a sound low in his throat that wasn't quite human. He turned to Petros with murder in his eyes. You collared her, beat her, sold her like livestock. Your Majesty, we had no way of knowing... My mate. The words came out raw and broken and filled with barely contained rage. You collared and sold my mate. The clearing went silent. Petros's face drained of color. You're... My king, I didn't... The bond shouldn't have been possible to sense until... Get out. Kaylor's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. Take your men and get the fuck out of my territory before I forget we have a treaty. The payment is void. The contract is void. Everything is void. Kaylor took a step toward the Credence commander, and Seraphine watched trained soldiers flinch backward. You have 30 seconds to disappear before I decide that your head on a spike is fair compensation for what you've done. Petros didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Marcus and Garrett, barking orders, and within moments the Credence warriors were retreating back across the border like demons were chasing them. Maybe they were. Kaylor Draven looked capable of becoming someone's personal hell. When the last torch disappeared into the darkness, Kaylor turned back to Seraphine. The rage in his expression had dimmed slightly, replaced by something more complex: conflict, desire, fear, need. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. You should run. Seraphine blinked. What? Run. His hands were shaking now, she noticed, actually trembling despite how tightly he'd fisted them. Get as far from me as you can. I'll give you supplies, coin, safe passage to whatever territory you choose. But you need to leave. Now. Before what? She didn't know where the courage came from. Maybe from the wolf howling in her chest, maybe from sheer exhaustion, maybe from the twisted humor of finding her fated mate, only to have him tell her to flee. "Before you kill me like you killed your father?" Several warriors hissed in shock. Varric moved forward, his hand on his sword. "Watch your tongue, Omegas." But Kaelor just laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that held no joy. "She's not wrong. You want to know what I am, Seraphine? What you're bonded to?" He spread his arms wide, letting firelight illuminate old scars and new ones, the violence carved into his very bones. "I'm the monster they whisper about. The butcher. The king who rules through fear because it's the only language my people understand. There's something broken inside me, something dark that I've spent 20 years trying to chain down, and it gets worse every year. More violent, harder to control. And when I lose that control..." He stopped, jaw clenched so tight she heard his teeth grind together. "People die. Innocent people. So yes, you should run. Because I won't claim you. I can't. I won't risk turning you into another victim." The clearing had gone dead silent. Even the fire seemed to burn quieter. Seraphine stood there in her torn tunic with rope burns on her wrists and mud on her skin, staring at the most feared alpha in 5 territories as he told her to abandon the bond that fate had forged between them. She should have been relieved, should have taken his offer and run as far and fast as her legs could carry her, should have thanked whatever gods were listening that her fated mate had enough conscience left to refuse her. Instead, she felt rage. Pure, incandescent, burning rage that cut through exhaustion and fear and every bruise on her body. "You're right," she said quietly. "You are a monster." Kaelor flinched like she'd struck him. "But not because you are violent or dangerous or struggling with some darkness inside you." Seraphine took a step forward, ignoring Varric's warning growl. "You're a monster because you're a coward." The temperature in the clearing dropped 10 degrees. Warriors reached for weapons. Varric's sword cleared its sheath with a metallic hiss. But Kaelor just stared at her with those impossible gold eyes, and Seraphine saw the truth there. He'd expected her to call him a monster, had wanted her to, needed her to hate him so he could push her away without guilt. She wouldn't give him that mercy. "You think you're protecting me?" Another step closer. Close enough now to feel the heat radiating from his body, to see the way his chest rose and fell with controlled breaths. "By sending me away alone? Unbonded? Do you know what happens to unclaimed Omegas in the Borderlands, Your Majesty? Do you care?" "Of course I fucking care." "Then claim me." The words left her mouth before she could stop them, reckless and wild and absolutely insane. "If you care so much about what happens to me, if you're so concerned about my safety and well-being, then do what your wolf is screaming at you to do and claim me." "I can't." "You mean you won't?" "It's the same thing." "It's really not." Seraphine reached up with trembling fingers and touched his face, feeling stubble rough beneath her palm, feeling him go absolutely still beneath her touch. "You're afraid you'll hurt me, but you're already hurting me by refusing what we both feel, by pretending you're doing this for my sake when really you're just too scared to try." Kaelor's hand came up and wrapped around her wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to pull her hand away. "You don't understand what you're asking for. Then explain it to me. Use words instead of orders and threats and noble self-sacrifice. Tell me the truth." For a long moment, he said nothing. Just held her wrist and stared at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve, a problem without an answer. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it, "There's a beast inside me. Has been since I was a child. Every full moon it gets stronger, harder to control. My father tried to beat it out of me, tried to starve it, chain it, purge it with silver and pain and anything else his priest suggested." His thumb moved absently over her pulse point, and she wondered if he could feel how fast her heart was beating. "Nothing worked, so when I was 16 and he came at me with a heated blade during a shift, I killed him, tore out his throat and felt the beast inside me sing with joy. And I've ruled with that beast ever since, using its strength to keep this kingdom from falling apart, but always knowing that one day I'll lose control completely, that I'll become the monster everyone believes I am." Diesi. "And you think bonding with me will make it worse?" "I think bonding with you will give that beast something to protect, something precious, And when I inevitably fail to control it, when I slip and fall into that darkness, you'll be the first thing it destroys. Seraphine felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. You've already decided I'll be a victim, already written the ending to a story we haven't even started. Don't I get a say in this? Don't I get to choose whether I'm willing to take that risk? No. He released her wrist like it burned him and stepped back, putting cold distance between them. Because you're not thinking clearly. The bond is clouding your judgment, making you believe you can fix something that's been broken for 20 years. I won't let you destroy yourself trying to save me. Even if I'm already destroyed? That stopped him. What? Seraphine laughed, and it came out sharp enough to cut. You think I had some wonderful life before tonight? You think being sold to settle my father's debts was the worst thing that's happened to me? I've been a prisoner since the day I presented as Omega, Kaelor. Locked away, hidden, treated like property that my father could trade or sell whenever it suited him. The only difference between his cage and yours is that yours comes with a choice, and I'm choosing to stay. Seraphine. I'm not asking you to claim me tonight. I'm not even asking you to want the bond. I'm asking you not to send me away. She met his eyes and held them, willing him to see her, really see her, not just the Omega his wolf had recognized. Let me stay in your kingdom. Give me a chance to prove I'm stronger than you think. And if the time comes when your beast breaks free and I can't handle it, then you can say I told you so while you mourn over my corpse. But at least give me the dignity of making my own choices about my own life. Silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Somewhere in the forest, a wolf howled. The bonfire crackled and spit sparks into the bloody sky. And Kaelor Draven, the Butcher King of Blackmoor, stared at the Omega who just demanded he let her gamble her life on his damaged soul. You're insane, he said finally. Probably. Reckless. Definitely. This is a mistake. Then it's mine to make. Another long moment. Then Kaelor turned to the scarred warrior who'd removed her collar. Gareth, prepare quarters in the East Wing. Somewhere comfortable, somewhere safe, somewhere far away from my chambers. Yes, my king. And get her a healer. I want every bruise, every rope burn, every injury treated and documented. Send the bill to Credence. It will be done. Kaelor looked back at Seraphine one more time, and she saw war raging in his golden eyes. Need versus control. Desire versus fear. The alpha wolf demanding he claim what was his, and the man trying desperately to protect her from himself. You can stay, he said roughly, but we won't bond. Won't complete the mate connection. You'll be under my protection as a member of this pack, nothing more. And if you change your mind, if you decide this was a mistake, I'll give you everything you need to leave. Coin, supplies, safe passage, whatever you want. Understood? It wasn't what her wolf wanted, wasn't what her soul screamed for, but it was something, a foothold in a crumbling cliff face, a chance. Understood, Seraphine whispered. Kaelor nodded once, sharp and final, then turned and walked away into the darkness beyond the firelight. Varric watched him go with an expression Seraphine couldn't read, then turned cold gray eyes on her. You've made a terrible mistake, Omega, he said softly. My brother is many things, but Savior is not one of them. He'll destroy you, and when he does, don't expect anyone here to mourn. Then he too walked away, leaving Seraphine alone in the firelight, with Gareth and a dozen Blackmoor warriors who looked at her like she was a fascinating problem they hadn't quite figured out how to solve. This way, my lady, Gareth said, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone built like a mountain. Let's get you somewhere warm. Seraphine followed him through the dark forest, away from the bonfire and the border and the life she'd left behind. Her wrists ached. Her ribs screamed with every breath. The silver burns on her throat felt like they'd been painted on with liquid fire. But through it all, she could still feel it. That golden thread stretching between her soul and the soul of the man who'd just walked away from her. The bond that fate had forged, and he refused to claim. It pulled at her with every step, urging her to turn back, to follow, to find him in whatever dark corner he'd retreated to and make him see that she wasn't afraid of his beast. She didn't turn back, not yet. But as Blackmoor's iron fortress rose up before her against the blood-red sky, all black stone and sharp towers and windows like hollow eyes. Seraphine Vale made herself a promise. She would survive this kingdom, would learn its rules, earn its respect, prove her worth to every warrior who looked at her like damaged goods. And when the time came, when Kaelor Draven's beast finally broke free and he expected her to run screaming into the night, she would stand her ground, even if it killed her. Especially if it killed her. Because for the first time in 23 years of being locked away and hidden and sold like livestock, Seraphine had something worth fighting for. A choice, her choice. And God's help anyone, including her fated mate, who tried to take it away from her. The fortress gate swung open with a groan of metal on metal. Gareth led her through a courtyard that smelled of horses and weapon oil, past training yards where warriors stopped mid-drill to stare, up stone steps worn smooth by centuries of boots. The halls inside were lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on walls hung with weapons and the skulls of animals she couldn't name. Everything about this place screamed danger, darkness, controlled violence barely leashed. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. "Here," Gareth said, stopping before a heavy wooden door. He pushed it open to reveal a room that was sparse but clean. A bed with actual blankets, a fireplace already burning, a table with a basin of water, a wardrobe against one wall. Compared to the cell she'd expected, it was a palace. "I'll have food sent up. The healer will arrive within the hour. Is there anything else you need, my lady?" Seraphine almost laughed. "Don't call me that. The king gave orders that you're to be treated with respect befitting what? An unclaimed Omega he's refusing to bond with? I'm not your lady, Gareth. I'm barely even a guest. Just call me Seraphine." The big warrior studied her with dark eyes that held more intelligence than his scarred face suggested. "As you wish, Seraphine. But for what it's worth..." He paused at the threshold, looking back at her. "You stood up to him, called him a coward to his face, and lived. That's more than most warriors in this fortress can say. You might not think you're worthy of respect, but you just earned mine." Then he was gone, pulling the door shut behind him, leaving Seraphine alone in a room that was too warm and too quiet after hours of cold and chaos. She made it to the bed before her legs gave out, made it to the blankets before the shaking started, made it through exactly 30 seconds of silence before the tears came. Seraphine curled into herself on that unfamiliar bed in that dangerous fortress and cried for everything she'd lost. Her father, despite his failures, her mother who'd screamed as soldiers dragged her away, the life she might have had if fate hadn't tied her soul to a monster king who was too broken to claim her. She cried until there was nothing left, until the tears dried up and the shaking stopped, and all that remained was a hollow exhaustion that felt like death. Then she heard it, soft at first, barely audible over the crackling fire, but growing stronger, clearer, a sound that bypassed her ears and went straight to her soul. Howling. Somewhere in the fortress, Kaelor Draven's wolf was screaming, and Seraphine's wolf, denied, suppressed, locked away by Silver for too many hours, rose up and screamed back. The bond flared to life between them, brilliant and burning and absolutely undeniable. She could feel him like he was standing in the room with her, could sense his pain, his rage, his desperate need to come to her warring with his iron control, could taste his fear that he would hurt her, destroy her, break her like he'd broken everything else he'd ever touched. She sent one thought down that golden thread, clear and strong and unshakable. "I'm not afraid of you." The howling stopped. For one crystalline moment, silence reigned. Then, so faint she might have imagined it, "You should be." The bond snapped shut like a door slamming closed, leaving Seraphine alone in her room with tears drying on her cheeks and the taste of smoke and pine still lingering in her soul. She lay there in the firelight, bruised and exhausted and utterly insane for choosing to stay in this place, and smiled, because Kaelor Draven could refuse to claim her, could keep his distance, deny the bond, pretend she was just another refugee under his protection. But he'd answered her, had opened that connection just long enough to speak directly to her soul, which meant he felt it too, felt the pull, the need, the impossibility of walking away from something fate had decided belonged to them. He just needed time. And Seraphine, who'd survived 23 years of being a prisoner, who'd endured being sold like livestock and dragged through the mud in a silver collar, who'd looked the Butcher King of Blackmoor in his golden eyes and called him a coward. Seraphine could be patient. Outside her window, wolves howled at a blood-red moon. Inside the fortress, warriors sharpened blades and told stories about their monster king. And deep in chambers far from the east wing, Kaelor Draven sat alone in the dark and tried to convince himself that refusing his fated mate was mercy instead of cowardice. None of them knew yet that everything had already changed, that the Omega they dismissed as damaged goods was about to become the most dangerous thing in Blackmoor. Not because she was strong or powerful or blessed by the gods, but because she'd looked into the heart of a beast and refused to flinch. And beasts, even broken ones, even monster kings with darkness in their souls, they always remembered who stood their ground when everyone else ran screaming. The night deepened, the fire burned low, and Seraphine finally let sleep claim her. Tomorrow, she would begin the impossible task of surviving in a kingdom built on violence and fear. Tomorrow, she would face warriors who wanted her gone, and a king who wouldn't claim her, and a brother prince whose cold gray eyes promised nothing but calculation. Tomorrow, she would start proving that she was worth more than 3 grain wagons and safe passage. But tonight she would rest and dream of golden eyes and impossible bonds and a future that hadn't been written yet. A future she intended to claim with both hands, even if it meant walking straight into the heart of darkness to get it. Dawn came cold and gray through windows that looked more like arrow slits than glass. Seraphine woke to the sound of steel on steel. Warriors training in the courtyard below, their shouts echoing off stone walls that had probably witnessed 1,000 years of violence. Her body ached in places she didn't know could hurt. The rope burns on her wrists had scabbed over during the night, pulling tight every time she moved her hands. She sat up slowly, taking inventory. Bruised ribs, tender but not broken. Split lip, healing. The silver burns on her throat where the collar had pressed felt like fire when she swallowed, but at least she could breathe without the metal cutting into her windpipe. The room looked different in daylight. Still sparse, still cold, but cleaner than she'd noticed last night. Someone had left a tray of food by the door while she slept. Bread that was only slightly stale, cheese, dried meat, a pitcher of water. Next to it sat a bundle of clothing. She crossed to it, wincing as her ribs protested, and unfolded what turned out to be a simple dress in dark gray wool, undergarments, and a pair of soft leather boots that looked about her size. No note, no explanation, just necessities provided by a king who refused to claim her but apparently wouldn't let her starve or freeze. Seraphine ate mechanically, forcing down food her stomach didn't want, knowing she'd need the strength. Then she washed in the basin, cold water that made her gasp, but at least it was clean, and dressed in the clothes that fit surprisingly well. The boots were almost comfortable. The dress hung loose enough to hide the worst of the bruising. She was braiding her hair when someone knocked. "Come in." The door opened to reveal a woman who looked like she'd been carved from the same stone as the fortress itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, with gray streaking through dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore leather armor over wool and carried a healer's bag that had seen better days. Her eyes, sharp and brown and missing absolutely nothing, swept over Seraphine in one assessing glance. "I'm Mira," the woman said without preamble. "The king sent me to check your injuries. You going to make this difficult?" "No." "Good. Most Omegas who end up here are either too traumatized to function or too proud to admit they're hurt. Sit." Seraphine sat on the bed. Mira approached with the efficiency of someone who'd patched up warriors for decades, setting her bag on the table and pulling out jars and bandages. Her hands were steady as she tilted Seraphine's chin up, examining the silver burns with a critical eye. "These are bad. Who collared you?" "Credence soldiers. Idiots." Mira opened a jar of something that smelled like pine and mint. "Silver-laced iron, meant to suppress your wolf entirely, not just restrain you. You're lucky you can still shift at all." She began applying the salve with gentle fingers that contradicted her harsh voice. "This will help with the burns, but you'll have scars. Nothing I can do about that." "I don't care about scars." Mira's eyes flicked to hers, sharp and evaluating. "No, I don't imagine you do. Not after calling the king a coward in front of half his guard." Word traveled fast, apparently. "He is a coward. He's a man trying not to become his father." Mira moved to examine the rope burns on Seraphine's wrists, her touch clinical but not unkind. And you're either the bravest Omega I've ever met or the stupidest. Haven't decided which yet. Can it be both? That earned her something that might have been a smile. Lift your dress. I need to see the ribs. Seraphine obeyed. Mira's expression darkened as she saw the bruising that painted Seraphine's torso in shades of purple and black. They kicked you. Several times. And the king saw this? Yes. Then Credence should be grateful he let them leave with their heads. Mira's hands probed gently along Seraphine's ribs, feeling for breaks. Nothing's fractured, but you'll be sore for weeks. I'll leave you willow bark tea for the pain. Drink it 3 times a day whether you think you need it or not. I don't need... That wasn't a suggestion, girl. You want to survive here. You need to heal. And you can't heal if you're too proud to admit you're hurt. Mira stepped back, wiping her hands on a cloth. Now, let's talk about the real reason the king sent me. Seraphine lowered her dress carefully. Which is? To assess whether you're stable enough to stay, or whether he needs to arrange transport out of Blackmoor before you do something else reckless. Mira's gaze pinned her in place. So, are you? Am I what? Stable. Sane. Capable of understanding that this fortress is not a fairy tale, and the king is not going to sweep you off your feet and make everything better. Seraphine met her eyes without flinching. I know exactly what this place is. I know what he is, and I'm staying anyway. Why? Because, for the first time in my life, someone gave me a choice, even if he doesn't want to. Mira studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You'll do. But understand this. Blackmoor doesn't coddle weakness. Warriors here have survived things that would break most people. They won't respect you because you're the king's mate. They'll respect you if you earn it, and only if you earn it. Can you do that? I don't know, Seraphine said honestly, but I'm going to try. Good answer. Mira packed her supplies back into her bag. The king wants you to stay in these quarters. Rest. Heal. Stay out of sight until he figures out what to do with you. And if I don't want to stay locked in a room, then you'll have a problem, because those weren't suggestions either. Mira left before Seraphine could respond, pulling the door shut with a finality that felt too much like a cell locking. Seraphine stood in the middle of her comfortable prison and felt rage build in her chest all over again. She hadn't survived being sold and collared and dragged across the borderlands just to sit quietly in a room while men decided her fate. The dress didn't have pockets, but the boots fit well enough for walking. Seraphine opened her door and stepped into the hallway before she could second-guess the decision. Empty, silent. Just stone walls and torches burning in brackets and the distant sound of training yards. She walked, chose directions at random. Left, then right, then up a flight of stairs that spiraled higher into the fortress. No one stopped her. No guards appeared to drag her back to her room. Either they didn't know she was supposed to be confined, or they didn't care enough to enforce it. The stairs opened onto a corridor lined with windows that looked out over the training yards. Seraphine stopped at one, watching warriors move through drills that looked more like actual combat than practice. They fought with real blades, real force, pulling strikes at the last second, but not by much. Blood on the packed earth suggested not everyone pulled in time. Admiring the view, Seraphine turned to find Varric leaning against the wall behind her, arms crossed, gray eyes cold as winter ice. He must have been following her. She hadn't heard him approach. Just watching, she said carefully. Watching. Varric pushed off the wall and moved closer, stopping just inside her personal space, close enough to be threatening without being overtly aggressive. Or judging, wondering if these savage Blackmoor warriors are as brutal as the stories claim. I don't care about stories. No? Then what do you care about, Omega? He tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he wanted to solve before breaking it apart. My brother? The bond you think will save you both? I don't think it will save anyone. That seemed to surprise him. His eyebrows rose slightly. Then why stay? Why demand to remain in a fortress full of warriors who could kill you without breaking a sweat, bound to a king who's made it very clear he won't claim you? Because it's my choice to make. Choice, Varric laughed, sharp and bitter. You think you have choices here? You're an unbonded Omega in a territory that respects strength above all else. The only reason you're alive is because my brother's wolf recognized you as mate. Without that, he snapped his fingers, you'd be worth less than the dirt under my boots. Seraphine felt her wolf stir, hackles rising at the threat in his voice. Is there a point to this conversation, or do you just enjoy intimidating people who can't fight back? I enjoy making sure people understand reality, and the reality is this: Kaelor won't claim you, can't claim you, not without risking everything he's built. So you have two options: leave now with your pride intact, or stay and watch him destroy himself trying to resist a bond that will only make him weaker. You think the bond makes him weak? I think you make him weak. Varric leaned in closer, and Seraphine forced herself not to step back. I've watched my brother fight a war inside himself for 20 years. Watched him claw his way to control through discipline and pain and sheer fucking willpower. And in one night, you've undone more of that control than a decade of full moons. He's distracted, conflicted, questioning decisions he would have made without hesitation yesterday. That makes him vulnerable. And vulnerability in a king gets people killed. So what do you suggest? That I leave and break the bond entirely? If you actually cared about him, yes. The words hit like a slap. Seraphine took a breath, held it, let it out slowly. You don't know anything about what I care about. I know you're selfish. I know you're clinging to a bond you didn't earn with a man you don't understand because it's better than whatever life you left behind. And I know that when this ends, when Kaelor finally loses the last shred of control he has and becomes the monster our father tried to beat out of him, you'll be the reason. Varric straightened, putting careful distance between them again. So do everyone a favor, Omega. Take the coin he'll offer you. Take the safe passage. And disappear before you get people killed. He walked away then, boots echoing on stone, leaving Seraphine alone by the window with his words cutting deeper than any blade. Because part of her, the part that had watched Kaelor walk away last night with war in his golden eyes, wondered if Varric was right. She stood there for a long time, watching warriors bleed in the yard below, before she found the strength to move again. The fortress was a maze, corridors that led to dead ends, staircases that spiraled up into towers or down into what smelled like dungeons, rooms that opened onto more rooms in an endless progression of stone and shadow. Seraphine wandered through it all, half lost and fully aware she was probably breaking a dozen rules just by being out of her quarters. She didn't care. Varric's words kept circling in her head like carrion birds. You make him weak. You'll be the reason he falls. Do everyone a favor and disappear. Was he right? Was she being selfish by staying? Was the bond, this thing fate had forced on both of them without permission, really going to destroy the man she was tied to? Lost? Seraphine spun to find Gareth standing in a doorway she hadn't noticed, his scarred face expressionless, but his dark eyes showing something like concern. Maybe, she admitted. The king's going to have my head if he finds out I let you wander around unsupervised. But Gareth didn't sound angry, just resigned. Come on, I'll take you somewhere you won't get into trouble. He led her down, away from the training yards and the warriors, into quieter sections of the fortress. They passed what looked like kitchens, massive hearths and the smell of bread baking, then storage rooms, then finally stopped at a heavy door that Gareth pushed open with one scarred hand. The library, he said simply. Seraphine stepped inside and felt something in her chest loosen for the first time since waking. Books. Shelves upon shelves of them, stretching up to a ceiling 2 stories high. Not new volumes, these were old, leather-bound, spine-cracked from use, but they were clean and organized and absolutely beautiful. I didn't think Blackmore had... A library? Gareth leaned against the doorframe. Most people don't. They see warriors and weapons and assume we're all illiterate savages. But the king's father, for all his faults, believed knowledge was power. Built this collection over 30 years. Kaelor's maintained it since. Does he read? Every night. Gareth's expression softened slightly. Sometimes I think books are the only thing keeping him sane. Well, books and discipline and the knowledge that if he loses control, hundreds of people die. Varric thinks I'm going to make him lose that control. Varric thinks a lot of things. Doesn't make him right. Gareth pushed off the doorframe. Stay here as long as you want. No one will bother you. And Seraphine, he paused, don't let my king's brother get in your head. He's good at that, finding the exact words that'll make you doubt yourself. But at the end of the day, he's not the one who has to live with the bond. You and Kaylor are. So maybe stop listening to everyone else's opinions about what you should do and figure out what you actually want. Boy. Then he was gone, leaving Seraphine alone in a library that smelled like old paper and possibilities. She spent hours there, reading, thinking, trying to untangle the mess of emotions and instincts and fears that had knotted themselves around her soul since the moment golden eyes met hers across a firelit clearing. The books were a welcome distraction. Histories of Blackmore's wars, treatises on pack dynamics, even a few volumes of poetry that someone had annotated in the margins with savage criticism. The handwriting looked familiar, sharp, controlled, precise. Seraphine ran her fingers over the notes and wondered if Kaylor knew she was here, sitting in his library, reading his books, touching pages he'd touched. Wondered if he could feel her through the bond he refused to acknowledge. Wondered if he was fighting the same desperate urge to find her that she was fighting to find him. You shouldn't be here. The voice came from behind her, and this time Seraphine didn't spin around in surprise. She'd felt him approach, had known the moment he entered the library because the bond between them flared to life like someone had poured oil on dying embers. Gareth brought me, she said without turning around, still looking at the poetry book in her hands. Said I wouldn't get into trouble here. Gareth's an optimist. Kaylor's boot struck stone as he moved closer. Not right next to her. He kept careful distance, staying just far enough away that they wouldn't accidentally touch. And he should have told you that the library is off limits. Is it? It is now. Seraphine finally turned to face him. He looked worse than he had last night. The shadows under his golden eyes had deepened into bruises, and tension lined his jaw like he'd been clenching it for hours. He'd changed clothes, dark leather, and a coat that made his shoulders look impossibly broad, but exhaustion hung on him like a physical weight. You didn't sleep, she said. Neither did you. I can feel it. So he wasn't even pretending the bond didn't exist. That was something. Seraphine set the poetry book down carefully. Your brother thinks I should leave. My brother thinks a lot of things. He thinks I make you weak. Kaylor's jaw tightened. And what do you think? I think he's afraid. I think he's watched you fight yourself for so long that the idea of you having something worth fighting for terrifies him. Because if you have something to lose, you might actually start caring about whether you win or lose. And that's unpredictable. You've known him for less than 12 hours. Doesn't make me wrong. Kaylor made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had held any humor. He moved to the window, putting his back to her, staring out at the gray sky. He's not entirely wrong, you know. About you being a distraction. I've made 3 tactical errors since last night because I was too busy thinking about... He stopped himself. I can't afford distractions. Can't afford to be anything less than completely focused. Not with war brewing at the northern border and half my council questioning whether I'm fit to rule. War? Raiders from the Frostlands. They've been testing our defenses for months, and now they're getting bolder. I'll have to ride out soon. Lead the response personally or risk looking weak. He turned back to her, and the weight in his eyes made her wolf whimper. Which means you'll be here alone, unprotected except for the guards I leave behind. And if word gets out that the king's mate is unbonded and vulnerable, then claim me. Seraphine. Just listen. She took a step toward him, saw him tense, stopped. I'm not asking you to complete the bond. I'm not asking you to love me or even want me, but you could make it clear that I'm under your protection. Mark me. Let your scent mix with mine, just enough that anyone who gets close knows I belong to Blackmore. To you. It doesn't have to mean anything more than that. It would mean everything more than that. Kaylor's voice had gone rough. You think I can touch you without wanting more? You think I can mark you and walk away and pretend my wolf isn't screaming at me to finish what I started? Then maybe you need to stop pretending. Seraphine closed the distance between them before he could retreat, standing close enough to feel heat radiating from his body. Maybe you need to admit that this bond exists and we can either fight it until it destroys us both, or we can figure out how to live with it. I can't, or won't. Because those aren't the same thing, Kaylor. One is impossible. The other is just fear. His hand came up lightning fast, catching her chin the same way Varric had, but completely different. Not threatening, just desperate. Like he needed to touch her or he'd shatter. His thumb brushed over her bottom lip, and Seraphine felt the bond between them ignite. "You don't know what you're asking," he whispered. "Then show me." For one crystalline moment, she thought he would. Thought he'd finally surrender to the pull between them and claim her the way every instinct was screaming at them both to allow. His eyes had shifted to amber gold, his wolf rising to the surface, and his hand trembled against her skin like he was physically restraining himself from... He stepped back, dropped his hand, put cold distance between them again. "No." The word came out flat. Final. "I won't condemn you to a half-life bound to someone who might kill you the next time the moon is full. I won't risk turning you into another victim of something I can't control. And I won't let you sacrifice yourself trying to save me from a fate I've already accepted." He moved toward the door, and Seraphine felt something break inside her chest. "Stay in your quarters. Don't wander the fortress. Don't engage with my brother or my warriors or anyone else until I return from the north. That's an order." "Minchent, I don't take orders from you." "Then take it as a request from someone who's trying very hard not to make the worst mistake of his life." Kaelor stopped at the threshold, his back to her, his hand on the doorframe like he needed it for support. "Please, Seraphine, for both our sakes, just stay safe until I get back. Then we'll figure out what to do about this impossible situation we're in. And if you don't come back?" She felt him flinch through the bond. "Then you take the coin and supplies I'll leave for you and go somewhere far away from Blackmoor and its monsters. Live the life you should have had before your father's debts destroyed it. Find an alpha who can give you everything I can't. Be happy." "I don't want another alpha." "You will, eventually, when the bond fades enough that you can think clearly again." "Bonds don't fade, Kaelor. You know that. Then I hope you're strong enough to survive what mine will do to you when I'm finally gone." He left. Just walked out of the library and disappeared into the fortress's stone corridors, leaving Seraphine alone with books and broken hopes and a bond that felt like it was tearing her apart from the inside. She wanted to scream, wanted to chase after him and force him to see that his self-sacrifice was just cowardice wearing a noble mask. Wanted to grab him by his leather coat and shake him until he understood that she wasn't some fragile thing that needed protecting from his darkness. But she didn't, because beneath the rage and frustration, she understood. He was trying to protect her the only way he knew how, by pushing her away, by refusing the bond, by building walls so high that even fate couldn't scale them. And if she kept pushing, kept demanding he claim her, kept throwing herself at those walls, she'd just prove Varric right, that she was selfish, reckless, a distraction that would get people killed. Seraphine sank into a chair and buried her face in her hands. The bond pulsed in her chest like a second heartbeat, connecting her to a man who was probably already halfway to his chambers, putting as much distance between them as the fortress would allow. She could feel him through it, his pain, his fear, his desperate need to protect her even if it meant destroying them both. And underneath it all, buried so deep he might not even recognize it himself. Love. Not the soft, gentle kind from stories, not romance or poetry or anything beautiful. Raw, broken, violent love that came with claws and teeth and the absolute certainty that he would burn the world to ash before he let anything hurt her, which was exactly why he wouldn't let himself have her. "Fuck," Seraphine whispered to the empty library. "We're both idiots." She stayed there until the light through the windows turned from gray to gold to dark. Stayed until her stomach demanded food and her bruised ribs demanded rest. Then she made her way back through the maze of corridors to her room, following the bond like a compass pointing home. A tray waited outside her door. Fresh bread, roasted meat, vegetables, and some kind of sauce, and a pot of tea that smelled like the willow bark Mira had mentioned. Someone had also left a note written in precise handwriting. "Drink the tea. That's an order you should probably follow." M. Seraphine carried everything inside, ate without tasting, drank the bitter tea because Mira was right, and pride wouldn't help her heal. Then she lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the fortress settle around her for the night. Somewhere in the building, Kaelor was preparing to ride north to war. Somewhere close, Varric was probably plotting how to convince her to leave before she caused more damage. And here, In this room that felt less like a prison and more like exile, Seraphine tried to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do next. The bond gave her no answers, just pulsed steadily in her chest, a constant reminder of what she couldn't have. She was still awake when she heard the howling start, not from the forest this time, from inside the fortress. Close, maybe directly below her room. The sound was pure anguish, a wolf trapped and raging and utterly alone. It bypassed her ears and struck straight into her soul, making her own wolf claw at the cage she'd built around it. Seraphine was moving before she could think. Out of bed, across the room, hand on the door. It was locked from the outside. She rattled the handle, disbelief turning to rage, turning to something colder. Someone had locked her in, trapped her, caged her while Kaylor's wolf screamed in agony somewhere below, and she couldn't reach him, couldn't help, couldn't do anything but stand there and feel the bond stretch taut enough to snap. "Let me out!" She pounded on the door with both fists, ignoring the pain in her wrists. "God damn it, let me out!" No answer. Just howling. Just her wolf answering his with a cry that made her throat raw. And then cutting through the chaos, footsteps. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Varric stood in the hallway with a key in one hand and cold satisfaction in his gray eyes. "The king left orders," he said calmly. "You're to be confined to quarters until he returns. For your own safety, of course." "You bastard! Careful, Omega. I'm the only thing standing between you and warriors who think an unbonded mate is fair game while their king is away." Varric tilted his head. "Unless you'd prefer I let them test that theory." Seraphine's hands curled into fists. "What do you want?" "I want you to leave. But since my brother was too soft to force the issue, I'm handling it my way." He pulled a sealed letter from his coat and held it out. "Coin. Safe passage to any territory you choose. A letter of recommendation that will get you work or protection wherever you go. Everything you need to start over somewhere that isn't here. And if I refuse, then you'll stay locked in this room until Kaylor returns, which could be days, weeks. Depends on how the war goes." Varric's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your choice, Seraphine. Take the offer and leave with your dignity and tact. Or stay and prove to everyone that you're exactly as selfish as I think you are." Below them, the howling cut off abruptly, leaving silence so complete it hurt. Seraphine stared at the letter in Varric's hand, at the escape he was offering, at the future that didn't include golden eyes and impossible bonds, and a fortress full of people who wanted her gone. She should take it, should grab the letter and the coin and run as far as her legs would carry her, should accept that Kaylor didn't want her, that staying would only make everything worse, that sometimes love, even fated, God's chosen, impossible love, wasn't enough. Her hand reached for the letter. Varric's smile widened, and then Seraphine's fingers closed around his wrist instead, gripping hard enough to feel bone. "No." Varric's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake." "Then it's mine to make, just like I told your brother." Seraphine released his wrist and stepped back into her room, meeting his gray eyes without flinching. "Lock me in if you want. Starve me. Threaten me. I don't care. I'm not leaving until Kaylor comes back and tells me himself, to my face, not through you, that he wants me gone. Until then, you can go fuck." The slap came so fast she didn't see it coming. Pain exploded across her cheek, snapping her head to the side, and she tasted blood. Varric stood in the doorway with his hand still raised and murder in his eyes. "You don't speak to me that way, Omega. You don't refuse my generosity. And you certainly don't stay in this fortress and distract my brother while men are dying at the border because he's too conflicted to lead properly." He lowered his hand slowly. "Last chance. Take the letter. Leave tonight, or I'll make sure you regret ever setting foot in Blackmore." Seraphine touched her split lip. Split again, she realized distantly, and felt something inside her shift. Not break, not surrender. Harden. "Do your worst," she said quietly. "I'm staying." Varric stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. A real smile this time, sharp and cold and absolutely terrifying. "As you wish." He left. The door slammed shut, the lock clicked home. Lock. And Seraphine stood alone in her comfortable prison, with blood on her lips and the taste of her own defiance bitter in her mouth. Below, silence reigned. Kaylor's wolf had gone quiet. The bond between them felt muted, like he'd locked it down completely, refusing to let her feel whatever he was going through. Smart, probably. Safer. But it left her more alone than she'd ever been, trapped in a room in a fortress full of people who wanted her gone, bound to a man who refused to claim her, facing a brother prince who just made it very clear that her continued existence here was. 3 days passed in that locked room. 3 days of silence, broken only by meals delivered without explanation, by the distant sounds of the fortress moving around her like she didn't exist, by her own breathing and the steady pulse of a bond that Kaelor had shut down so completely she could barely feel him anymore. Seraphine counted the hours by the light changing through her window, by the meals that appeared and disappeared, by the slow healing of bruises that had started to fade from purple to yellow-green. Mira came once, checked her injuries with brisk efficiency, left more willow bark tea and salve for the silver burns, said nothing about the new split in Seraphine's lip or the finger-shaped bruises on her wrist where Varric had grabbed her. Just packed her bag and left with a look that might have been pity or might have been disappointment. No one else came. No guards to explain why she was locked in. No warriors to check if she was still alive. No Gareth with his scarred face and unexpected kindness. Just silence and isolation and the growing certainty that Varric had been right. She was alone here, unwanted, a problem everyone hoped would solve itself by disappearing. On the fourth morning, the lock clicked open. Seraphine sat up from where she'd been lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling, counting cracks in the stone. The door swung wide to reveal not a guard or Mira or anyone she'd expected, but a girl who couldn't have been more than 16. Blonde hair, blue eyes wide with something between fear and curiosity, wearing the simple dress of a servant. "You're to come with me," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where?" "The hall. The king returned last night. He's calling a council, and—" She swallowed hard. "You're summoned." Kaelor was back. The bond flared to life in Seraphine's chest like someone had doused it in oil and struck a match. She could feel him now, exhausted, wounded, barely holding together, somewhere close in the fortress. Her wolf surged forward with desperate need to go to him, to see him, to confirm he was alive despite whatever had happened in the north. "Now?" Seraphine asked. "Please. Lord Varric said if you refuse, I'm to tell the guards to bring you by force." Of course he did. Seraphine stood slowly, her ribs protesting after days of lying still. She was still wearing the gray dress, now wrinkled and stained. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders. She probably looked exactly like what she was, a prisoner who'd been locked away and forgotten. Good. Let them see what they'd done. The girl, she never offered her name, led Seraphine through corridors that felt different in daylight. Less threatening, just cold and functional. They passed warriors who stopped to stare, servants who whispered behind their hands, all the life of the fortress that had continued without her while she rotted in comfortable exile. The great hall sat at the fortress's heart. Massive doors of iron-banded wood stood open, revealing a space that could easily hold 200 people. Stone floors, high ceilings with beams thick as tree trunks, a raised platform at one end where a throne carved from black stone sat like a judge's seat, and everywhere, weapons, swords and axes and spears mounted on walls like trophies, a reminder that Blackmoor was built on violence and maintained through strength. The hall was packed. Warriors lined the walls, their faces hard and evaluating. Council members, older men and women in formal dress, occupied benches near the throne. And at the center of it all, standing rather than sitting on his throne, was Kaelor. He looked like he'd been through hell. His leather armor was torn and stained with blood, some of it dried to black, some of it still fresh enough to look red. A bandage wrapped his left forearm. Another crossed his ribs beneath the armor. His face was haggard, pale beneath the tan, and his golden eyes held exhaustion so deep it looked like pain. But he stood straight, shoulders back, every inch the warrior king despite obviously needing to sit down before he fell down. Their eyes met across the crowded hall. The bond slammed open between them with enough force to make Seraphine gasp. Everything he'd been blocking for 4 days came flooding through. Pain from wounds that were healing too slowly, rage at enemies who'd killed good warriors, guilt over decisions made in the heat of battle, and underneath it all a desperate, aching need to see her, to confirm she was safe, to— He shut it down again. slammed the bond closed so hard Seraphine felt the echo of it in her bones. His expression went carefully blank. "Seraphine Vale," he said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "Step forward." The crowd parted. Seraphine walked through them, feeling every eye on her, hearing whispers that didn't bother staying quiet. Omega, unbonded, weak, distraction. Why is she still here? She stopped 10 feet from the platform, keeping her chin up and her eyes on Kaylor's face. "My king," she said quietly. Something flickered in his expression, pain or regret or both, but it was gone before she could identify it. He looked past her to where Varric stood near the council benches, perfectly composed in dark formal wear that made him look like a prince from old stories. "Report," Kaylor said. Varric stepped forward with a slight bow. "As you ordered, the Omega was kept in protective custody during your absence. Meals provided, injuries monitored by healer Mira, no incidents to report." Liar. The word burned on Seraphine's tongue, but she bit it back. Now wasn't the time. Not with 200 witnesses and a king who looked like he was barely staying conscious. "And her request to leave?" Kaylor asked. "The coin and safe passage I authorized before departing?" Seraphine's stomach dropped. "What?" Kaylor's eyes cut to her and they held nothing. No warmth, no recognition, no trace of the man who touched her face in the library and admitted his wolf was screaming. "I left instructions that you be given funds and escort to any territory you chose. Compensation for what Credence did to you, and an apology for bringing you into a situation you never asked for. My brother was to facilitate your departure." "I never," Seraphine started. "She refused," Varric cut in smoothly, "multiple times. Became quite hostile about it, actually. I tried to explain that staying would only complicate an already difficult situation, but she insisted on remaining until you returned. Said she wouldn't leave without hearing it from you directly." The hall erupted in whispers. Seraphine heard words like stubborn and foolish and doesn't know her place filtering through the crowd. She ignored all of it, focusing on Kaylor's face, searching for any sign that he saw through his brother's careful manipulation. His expression didn't change. "Is that true?" he asked her. "Yes, but you Then you've heard it. Directly from me." Kaylor's voice was flat, professional, the tone of a king addressing a problem that needed solving. "I'm grateful you survived Credence's brutality. I'm grateful the bond led you here, rather than somewhere worse. But Blackmoor is not a safe place for an unbonded Omega, and I cannot in good conscience allow you to remain in a fortress full of warriors who might see you as—" He stopped himself. "You deserve better than this. Better than me. So I'm asking you, Seraphine, please, take what I'm offering and go somewhere you can actually be happy." "Me? Me must me." The bond between them pulsed with suppressed emotion, with pain and longing and desperate sincerity. But his face showed nothing. He meant it, every word. He was trying to save her the only way he knew how, by sending her away. Seraphine felt something crack in her chest. Not break, not yet, but fracture enough to hurt. "And if I refuse again? Then you're forcing my hand." Kaylor's jaw tightened. "And I'll have no choice but to make it an order. As king, leave Blackmoor within 3 days or be escorted out by force. Your choice." Silence crashed over the hall like a physical weight. Seraphine stood there in her wrinkled dress with her split lip and her fading bruises, staring at the man fate had tied her to, and felt the full weight of how completely alone she actually was. No allies, no friends, no one who would speak for her or defend her or even question whether this was the right decision. Just her, and a king who'd made up his mind. "You're a coward," she said quietly. The whispers stopped. Every warrior in the hall went still. Even Varric's eyebrows rose slightly. Kaylor's expression didn't change. "That's the second time you've called me that." "Because it's still true." Seraphine took a step closer to the platform. "You're not doing this to protect me. You're doing it to protect yourself. Because if I leave, you don't have to deal with the bond. Don't have to face what it means or what you feel or the possibility that maybe, just maybe, you could have something good for once in your miserable life." "Seraphine, I'm not finished." Another step. close enough now that she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw, could smell blood and exhaustion and smoke. You want me gone because I make you feel things, want things, things you've convinced yourself you don't deserve because of some beast you think is going to destroy everything you touch. But here's the truth, Your Majesty. The only thing destroying anything is you, your fear, your refusal to even try. So yes, you're a coward, and sending me away won't change that. The hall exploded. Warriors shouted. Council members stood demanding order. Someone called for guards to remove her. Through it all, Kaelor just stared at Seraphine with those impossible gold eyes, and she watched something in him finally break. Enough! His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Instant silence. Everyone out! Now! Council dismissed. Warriors, return to your posts. This audience is over. Brother, with respect, she can't be allowed to... Varric started. I said out. Kaelor's eyes never left Seraphine's face. Everyone except her. Go. The hall cleared in less than 2 minutes. Warriors filed out with backward glances. Council members left muttering among themselves. Varric hesitated at the door, his gray eyes moving between his brother and Seraphine with an expression she couldn't read, before finally leaving with a bow that looked more like a threat. The great doors slammed shut, and Seraphine was alone with the king she'd just called a coward in front of his entire court. Kaelor moved, descended from the platform with careful precision, each step controlled despite the obvious pain. He crossed the distance between them until he stood close enough to touch, and Seraphine could see the damage up close. The bandages bleeding through, the exhaustion carved into every line of his face, the way his hands trembled slightly before he fisted them. Do you have any idea what you just did? His voice was quiet, deadly. Told the truth. You humiliated me, questioned my authority, made me look weak in front of warriors who are already wondering if I'm fit to rule. His jaw clenched. I should have you thrown in the dungeons for that. Should make an example of what happens to people who challenge the king in open court. Then do it. Seraphine met his eyes without flinching. Lock me up. Throw me out. Do whatever you think will make this easier, but stop pretending you're doing it for me when we both know you're just scared. Scared? Kaelor laughed, bitter and broken. You want to know what I'm scared of, Seraphine? I'm scared that I'll claim you, and 6 months from now I'll wake up with your blood on my hands because the beast finally won. I'm scared that bonding with you will give that darkness something to latch onto, something precious to destroy. I'm scared that the best thing that's ever happened to me is also going to be the worst mistake I ever make. So yes, I'm fucking terrified. But that doesn't make me a coward. It makes me realistic. It makes you a coward, Seraphine repeated, because you've already decided how this ends. Already written the story where you lose control and I die, and it's all some tragic inevitability. You won't even give us a chance to prove that fate wrong because you're too busy protecting me from a future that hasn't happened yet. And what if it does happen? Kaelor's control was fracturing. She could hear it in his voice, see it in the way his eyes had shifted to amber gold. What if I claim you and complete the bond, and everything is perfect for a while? And then one night during a full moon, I lose myself, and the last thing you see is my face before I tear out your throat? What then, Seraphine? Is proving me wrong worth dying for? Yes. The word hung between them like a blade. Kaelor stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You're insane! I'm honest, which is more than I can say for you. Seraphine closed the last bit of distance between them, tilting her head back to hold his gaze. You want to know what I think? I think you've spent so long being the monster everyone expects that you've forgotten how to be anything else. I think you use this beast inside you as an excuse to keep everyone at arm's length so you never have to risk being vulnerable. And I think the real reason you won't claim me has nothing to do with protecting me and everything to do with the fact that if you did, you'd have to admit you actually want something for yourself instead of just existing to serve your kingdom. But you don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Seraphine reached up and touched his face, feeling him go rigid beneath her palm. Then why are you shaking? Why can I feel your wolf howling through the bond right now, begging you to claim what's yours? Why did you shut everyone out of this hall the second I called you a coward? Because if you really didn't care, You would have let them drag me out and been done with it. Kaler caught her wrist. Not hard, just firm enough to stop her. His thumb found her pulse point, and she knew he could feel how fast her heart was beating. You're playing a dangerous game. I'm not playing at all. I'm fighting for something I want, something I chose. And if that terrifies you more than any beast or darkness or war, then maybe you need to ask yourself why. For a long moment, he just held her wrist and stared at her with those amber gold eyes. And Seraphine watched a war rage across his face. Need versus fear. Desire versus control. The alpha wolf demanding he claim his mate, and the man trying desperately to protect her from himself. Then he released her wrist and stepped back, and the distance felt like death. 3 days, he said quietly. You have 3 days to leave Blackmoor. After that, I'll have you escorted to the border myself if I have to. And Seraphine, he turned toward the doors, his back to her. Don't make this harder than it already is, please. He left. Just walked away through those massive doors and disappeared into the fortress, leaving Seraphine alone in the great hall with the taste of defeat bitter in her mouth. She'd lost, said everything she could say, fought as hard as she knew how, and it hadn't been enough. He was still going to send her away, still going to refuse the bond, still going to condemn them both to a half-life of wanting what they couldn't have, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it. Seraphine stood there for a long time, staring at the empty throne, feeling the bond pulse weakly in her chest. Then she turned and walked back toward her quarters, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. She was halfway there when Mira appeared from a side corridor. Walk with me, the healer said without preamble. That wasn't a request, girl. Walk. Seraphine followed because she didn't have the energy to argue. Mira led her away from the main corridors, down into sections of the fortress that felt older, colder. Storage rooms gave way to what looked like archives, then to a heavy door that Mira unlocked with a key from her belt. Inside was a room that smelled like dried herbs and old paper. Shelves lined the walls, packed with bottles and jars and books that looked ancient. A table sat in the center, covered in notes and diagrams that Seraphine couldn't decipher. Sit, Mira ordered, pointing to a stool. Seraphine sat. Mira moved around the room, gathering bottles and a mortar and pestle, her movements precise and practiced. You're angry, the healer said, observant, and hurt, and probably wondering if staying was worth it. Mira ground something that looked like dried flowers, the sound rhythmic and oddly soothing. I'm going to tell you something, and you're going to listen without interrupting. Understood? Seraphine nodded. Kalor's father, the old king, was a bastard. Cruel, brutal, believed pain was the only teacher worth respecting. When Kylor presented as Alpha at 14, his father decided the boy needed to be broken before he could be molded. So he tried. Beat him, starved him, locked him in silver chains during shifts to see if he could suppress his wolf entirely. Mira's hands never stopped moving, mixing herbs with practiced efficiency. It didn't work, just made the wolf stronger, more violent. So the king tried harder, brought in priests and healers and anyone who claimed they could purge the darkness he saw in his son, and through it all, Kalor endured, survived, became the weapon his father wanted while keeping just enough of himself intact to remember who he used to be. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what you're asking him to risk. Mira looked up, her brown eyes sharp. The beast inside Kalor isn't some metaphor. It's real. A wolf so damaged by abuse and pain and forced suppression that it doesn't know how to exist without violence. And the only reason he's kept control this long is through discipline, so rigid it would break most people. No emotional attachments, no distractions, no wants or needs beyond serving his kingdom. That's how he survives. That's how he keeps the beast chained. Son, and you think I'll break that control? I think you already have. The moment the bond snapped into place, you became the one thing his wolf wants more than violence, more than control, more than survival. Mira poured the mixture into a small vial, which means if he claims you, if he completes that bond, he's gambling everything he's built on the hope that love is stronger than trauma. And if he's wrong, if the beast wins, you die. So don't stand there and call him a coward for trying to protect you from a fate he's seen destroy people he cared about before. The words hit like physical blows. Seraphine felt her certainty waver, felt doubt creep in where there had only been stubborn determination. "Has it happened before?" she asked quietly. "Has he lost control and hurt someone?" Mira was silent for a long moment. Then, once, 3 years ago, a warrior challenged his authority during a full moon. Kaylor was already struggling to maintain his shift, and the challenge pushed him over the edge. By the time Gareth and Varric pulled him off, the warrior was dead, throat torn out, face unrecognizable. And Kaylor, she stopped, her expression pained. He didn't remember doing it, came back to himself covered in blood with no memory of the violence, just the aftermath. That's when he made the decision. No emotional bonds, no risk of caring about someone enough to lose control when they're threatened. It's why he has no mate, no lover, nothing that might give the beast leverage. Until me. Until you. Mira handed her the vial. Drink this before bed, it'll help you sleep without dreams. You'll need rest for whatever decision you make. Seraphine took the vial with numb fingers. What would you do? If you were me. Mira studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly gently, I'd ask myself if loving someone means letting them destroy themselves to protect me, or if it means standing beside them and fighting the darkness together. But that's a question only you can answer, girl. No one else. She left Seraphine alone in the herb-scented room with a vial of sleeping draft and the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her shoulders. Seraphine sat there for a long time, turning the vial over in her hands, thinking about everything Mira had said. About Kaylor's father, and the beast born from abuse, and the warrior who died because an alpha lost control. About whether she had the right to ask someone to risk that kind of catastrophe just because fate said they belonged together. Maybe Varric had been right all along. Maybe the kindest thing she could do was leave. Let Kaylor maintain his control. Keep his kingdom safe. Survive without the constant temptation of a bond he couldn't afford to complete. She could take the coin and safe passage, find some small territory where no one knew her story, build a quiet life far from monsters and fortresses and impossible loves. It would hurt. Would probably hurt for the rest of her life. But at least no one would die because she'd been too selfish to walk away. Seraphine pocketed the vial and made her way back to her quarters. The halls were quiet now, most warriors either at their posts or resting. No one stopped her. No one spoke to her. She was already a ghost in this place, haunting corridors where she'd never really belonged. Her room felt smaller than before, more suffocating. She sat on the bed and stared at nothing, trying to convince herself that leaving was the right choice. She was still trying when someone knocked. "Come in," she said dully. The door opened to reveal not Mira or Gareth or even the silent servant girl, but Varric. He stood in the threshold with something that might have been triumph in his gray eyes, a sealed letter in his hand. "I thought you might have changed your mind," he said. "About what?" "About staying. About risking lives for a bond that's going to end in tragedy." Varric stepped inside without invitation, closing the door behind him. "My brother told you to leave in 3 days. I'm offering you the chance to leave tonight, right now, before this gets any worse." "How considerate." "I'm not being considerate. I'm being practical. Every day you stay, Kaylor gets more attached, more conflicted, more vulnerable. And when he finally rides to war again, which he will, probably within the month, that vulnerability will get him killed. Or worse, will get the warriors following him killed because he's too busy worrying about you to make tactical decisions." Varric held out the letter. "So I'm asking one final time. Take this. Leave. Save everyone the pain of watching this slowly destroy him." Seraphine stared at the letter. At escape. At the future where she wasn't responsible for anyone's death. "Why do you care so much?" she asked. "Because he's my brother. Because I've spent 20 years watching him fight himself to keep this kingdom stable. And because I won't let some unbonded Omega with delusions of romance undo everything he's sacrificed." Varric's voice went cold. "You think you love him. Think fate tying you together means you're meant to save each other. But love doesn't fix trauma, Seraphine. It just gives trauma new ways to destroy people. So do the loving thing. Walk away before you get him killed." The words echoed everything Seraphine had been thinking. Every doubt, every fear, every rational argument for why staying was selfish. She reached for the letter. Varric's smile was knife-sharp. Smart choice. Seraphine took it, felt the weight of coin inside the envelope, felt the promise of escape and safety and a life that didn't end in blood and regret. Then she tore it in half. Varric's smile vanished. "I'm not leaving," Seraphine said quietly. "Not tonight. Not in 3 days. Not until Kaelor looks me in the eye and tells me he doesn't want me here. And even then, I might not go. Because you're right about one thing. I do love him. Which means I'm not going to abandon him just because the future is scary. I'm going to stay and fight for something worth fighting for, even if it kills me, even if it kills him. Because that's what love actually is. Not protecting people from pain, but standing with them in it." Varric stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Then his expression shifted to something darker, more dangerous. "You stupid, stubborn—" He moved faster than she could react, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. "You think you're being noble, brave? You're being selfish. And when my brother finally loses control and tears you apart, I'll make sure everyone knows it was your choice. Your arrogance. Your refusal to listen to people who actually understand what he's capable of. Let go of me. Or what? You'll scream? Fight back?" Varric's grip tightened. "There's no one coming to save you, Omega. No bondmate to defend you. Just you and me and the truth. You're a complication this kingdom doesn't need." The door slammed open. Gareth filled the doorway, his scarred face twisted with rage. "Get your hands off her. Now!" Varric released Seraphine's arm, stepping back with his hands raised in mock surrender. "Just having a conversation, Gareth. No need for dramatics." "A conversation that involves bruising her arm? Try again." Gareth moved into the room, putting himself between Seraphine and Varric. "The king gave orders she's not to be harmed. You want to explain to him why you're in here touching her against her will?" "I was offering her an opportunity to leave peacefully before you what?" Kaelor's voice cut through the room like a whip. Everyone froze. The king stood in the doorway, and he looked like violence barely leashed. His eyes had gone full amber gold, his wolf so close to the surface Seraphine could feel it through the bond. He took in the scene. Varric standing too close, Gareth positioned protectively, Seraphine with finger-shaped marks already forming on her arm, and something in his expression turned absolutely feral. "Everyone out," he said quietly, "except Varric. We need to talk." Gareth hesitated. "My king, take Seraphine somewhere safe. Make sure she has everything she needs. And Gareth," Kaelor's eyes never left his brother's face, "if I find out anyone else has touched her, harmed her, or threatened her in any way, I'll consider it a personal declaration of war. Spread the word." "Yes, my king." Gareth gently took Seraphine's elbow, careful to avoid the bruises, and guided her toward the door. She looked back once, catching Kaelor's eyes, trying to communicate everything she couldn't say with half the fortress probably listening just outside. He gave one tiny shake of his head. "Not now." Then Gareth pulled her into the corridor and the door slammed shut behind them, leaving the brothers alone with whatever confrontation was about to explode. "This way," Gareth murmured, leading her quickly away from that closed door and the violence it probably contained. They walked in silence through corridors that felt endless until finally stopping at another door, this one unguarded, smaller than her previous quarters. "My room," Gareth explained at Seraphine's confused look. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out something more permanent, but for now—" He pushed the door open. "You'll be safe, I promise." The room was Spartan, a bed barely bigger than a cot, a table with a single chair, weapons hanging on the walls, but it felt safer than anywhere else in the fortress. "Thank you," Seraphine whispered. Gareth nodded. "Try to rest. Whatever happens between them tonight, you'll need your strength for what comes after." He left, pulling the door shut but not locking it. Seraphine sank onto the bed and stared at the bruises forming on her arm, listening to her own heartbeat and the distant sounds of the fortress settling for the night. Somewhere above her, two brothers were having a conversation that would decide her fate. Somewhere in her chest, a bond pulsed with emotion she couldn't decipher, rage and fear, and something that felt almost like hope. And somewhere deep in the foundation of everything she thought she knew, cracks were beginning to form. Because Mira's story about the dead warrior kept playing in her mind, about Kaelor losing control during a challenge, about coming back to himself covered in blood with no memory of what he'd done, about the beast that didn't know how to exist without violence. Seraphine pulled out the vial of sleeping draught and stared at it, wondering if dreamless sleep was worth the oblivion. Wondering if she'd just signed her own death warrant by refusing to leave. Wondering if love really was enough to fight darkness that had been born in abuse and baptized in blood. She was still wondering when she heard the howling start again. 2 wolves this time, their voices twining together in a harmony that sounded less like music and more like... The howling stopped as abruptly as it started. Seraphine sat on Gareth's bed with the sleeping draught still clutched in her hand, listening to silence that felt heavier than sound. The bond in her chest pulsed erratically, spikes of rage followed by nothing, then more rage, then something that felt almost like grief. Whatever was happening between Kaelor and Varric, it wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a war. She stood, paced the small room. 3 steps one way, turn, 3 steps back. The bruises on her arm throbbed in time with her heartbeat. Her ribs ached. The silver burns on her throat felt like they were on fire despite Mira's salve. Everything hurt, and none of it mattered because somewhere in this fortress, the man she was bonded to was tearing himself apart, and she couldn't do a damn thing about it. The door flew open. Gareth stood there with blood on his knuckles and murder in his eyes. "We need to move. Now." What happened? Varric's calling an emergency council, claims the king is unfit to rule, says the bond has made him unstable, dangerous. Half the warriors are already gathering in the Great Hall, and the other half don't know which side to take. Gareth grabbed her arm, gently, carefully avoiding the bruises, and pulled her into the corridor. "Kaelor sent me to get you out. There's a passage that leads to the stables. Horses ready. Supplies. Everything you need to reach the southern border before—" "No." Gareth stopped, stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "This isn't a negotiation. The fortress is about to erupt into civil war, and you're the spark that lit the fire. If Varric's people get their hands on you, they'll use you against Kaelor, kill you to prove he's weak, or worse, keep you alive and make him watch while they—" "I said no." Seraphine yanked her arm free. "I'm not running, not when Kaelor needs— He needs you alive and far away from here. That's the only thing he's been clear about. So move your stubborn ass before I have to carry you. Try it." Seraphine planted her feet, meeting Gareth's eyes with every ounce of determination she had left. "I spent my entire life being told where to go and what to do and who I belong to. I'm done running, done hiding, done letting other people decide my fate. So you can drag me kicking and screaming to those horses, or you can take me to wherever Kaelor is so I can stand with him. Your choice." Gareth's jaw worked. "He'll kill me. He'll kill you if I die because you left me unprotected. At least this way I'm with people who might actually fight for me." Seraphine softened her voice slightly. "Please, Gareth. I know you're following orders. I know you're trying to keep me safe. But I can't leave him. Not now. Not like this." For a long moment, Gareth said nothing, just stood there with blood drying on his knuckles and conflict written across his scarred face. Then he cursed, low and vicious, and turned back the way they'd come. "Stay behind me. Don't speak unless spoken to. And if things go bad, when things go bad, you run. Understood?" "Understood." They ran through corridors that echoed with shouts and the clash of steel on steel. The fortress had transformed in the hours since Seraphine had been locked in Gareth's room. Warriors stood in clusters arguing, hands on weapons. Servants cowered in doorways. The air tasted like violence barely restrained, like everyone was waiting for the first drop of blood to give them permission to tear each other apart. The great hall doors stood open, spilling firelight and voices into the corridor. Gareth slowed as they approached, his hand dropping to the sword at his hip. "Whatever happens in there," he murmured, "don't react. Don't defend yourself. Let me handle it." Seraphine nodded, though she had no intention of keeping that promise. They entered the hall to chaos. 200 warriors packed the space, divided into rough groups on either side of an invisible line. On the left, warriors in battle-worn leather, with loyalty written in every hard line of their bodies. On the right, warriors in formal armor with calculation in their eyes. Between them, the council occupied their benches, faces ranging from terrified to intrigued. And at the center of it all, Kaelor and Varric stood 5 feet apart like opposing generals before a battle. The king looked like he'd already been through a war. Fresh blood stained his torn shirt. A cut above his eyebrow dripped red down his face. His knuckles were split and bleeding, but he stood tall, shoulders back, golden eyes burning with rage so pure it felt like heat radiating across the hall. Varric looked untouched. Not a hair out of place, formal wear still pristine. But his gray eyes held triumph, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the silent hall with the confidence of someone who'd already won. "You've lost control, brother. Attacked me without provocation. Threatened warriors who questioned your judgment, all because of her." He pointed at Seraphine without looking. "An Omega you refuse to claim but can't let go. A distraction you're willing to tear this kingdom apart to protect. Tell me, how is that the behavior of a stable king?" "I'm stable enough to recognize a coup when I see one." Kaelor's voice was rough, dangerous. "You've been planning this for weeks, gathering support, spreading doubt, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Omega was just an excuse. You would have found another." "Would I?" Varric's smile was knife-sharp. "Or have you finally given me the ammunition I needed to prove what I've known for years? That you're one bad day away from becoming our father? That the beast inside you is getting stronger, not weaker? That eventually you'll lose control and everyone in this fortress will pay the price?" The hall erupted in shouts. Warriors arguing, council members demanding order, chaos spreading like fire through dry grass. Kaelor raised one hand and silence crashed down so completely it hurt. "You want to challenge me?" he asked quietly. "Then do it properly. Call for a vote of no confidence. Let the council decide if I'm fit to rule. But don't hide behind concern for the kingdom when we both know this is about power. It's always been about power with you." "Fine," Varric turned to the council. "I'm calling for an emergency vote. The king has proven himself compromised by a bond he refuses to complete with an Omega he refuses to release. His judgment is clouded, his priorities are divided, and if we don't act now, his instability will get people killed. I propose temporary removal until such time as he can prove he's regained control. All in favor?" Seraphine watched in horror as hands rose. Not all of them, maybe a third of the council, but enough to show this wasn't just Varric's delusion. Enough people genuinely believed Kaelor was too dangerous to rule. "Noted," Kaelor said flatly. "All opposed?" More hands, maybe half. The rest sat frozen, unwilling to commit either way. "The council is divided," one of the older members said, standing, "which means by law, the decision falls to trial by combat. The challenger and the challenged fight to first blood or submission. Winner takes the throne. Those are the old laws, my king. Do you accept?" Kaelor's eyes never left his brother's face. "I accept." "No." The word ripped from Seraphine's throat before she could stop it. Every head in the hall turned. "You can't. He's injured. He just got back from war. He's not in any condition to—" "Stay out of this, Omega," Varric said coldly. "This doesn't concern you." "Like hell it doesn't. You're using me as an excuse to take his throne, making him fight when he can barely stand. That's not honor, that's murder." "Then maybe you should have left when you had the chance." Varric's gray eyes pinned her in place. "But you didn't. You stayed, refused every opportunity to walk away, and now you get to watch what your stubbornness costs." Seraphine started to move forward, but Gareth's hand clamped down on her shoulder, holding her back. She looked at Kaelor, desperate for him to call this off, to refuse the challenge, to choose survival over pride. He met her eyes across the crowded hall, and through the bond she felt everything he couldn't say. "I'm sorry. I tried to protect you. I should have been stronger." "Kaelor, please." "It's done." He looked away, severing the connection. "Gareth, take her to your quarters and lock the door. Don't let her out until this is over. That's an order." "My king." "Now." Gareth pulled. Seraphine fought, tried to dig in her heels, but he was too strong and she was too exhausted from days of captivity and not enough food. He dragged her toward the doors while she screamed Kaelor's name, while the bond between them stretched and burned and felt like it was tearing her apart from the inside. The last thing she saw before Gareth hauled her into the corridor was Kaelor and Varric circling each other like wolves preparing to tear out each other's throats. Then the doors slammed shut. "Let me go!" Seraphine clawed at Gareth's arm. "I have to stop this. He's going to get himself killed because of me, and I can't—" "You can't do anything." Gareth didn't slow down, just kept pulling her through corridors that blurred together. "The challenge has been issued and accepted. By law, by tradition, by every rule this kingdom is built on, they have to fight. And if you try to interfere, you'll only make it worse. Worse? How could it possibly be worse? If the king loses focus because he's worried about you, he dies. If he wins, but has to watch you get hurt trying to help him, the guilt will destroy what's left of his control, and Varric wins anyway. The only way Kaelor survives this is if you're somewhere safe, where he doesn't have to think about you. So stop fighting me and start thinking about him for once instead of yourself. The words hit like a slap. Seraphine stopped struggling, went limp in Gareth's grip. He was right. Every instinct screaming at her to go back and fight was just selfishness wearing concern like a mask. If she really wanted to help Kaelor, the best thing she could do was exactly what he'd asked. Stay out of the way and let him handle this without worrying about her. But gods, it hurt. Gareth got her back to his room and locked the door from the outside. Seraphine stood in the center of the small space, listening to his footsteps fade, feeling the bond pulse with adrenaline and pain and grim determination. The fight had started. She couldn't see it, couldn't hear it through the thick stone walls, but she could feel every blow through the bond, pain exploding in her ribs, Kaelor getting hit, rage surging hot and bright, Kaelor landing a strike, back and forth, an ebb and flow of violence that made her gasp and double over because the bond was translating every sensation into her own body. Seraphine collapsed onto the bed, curling around the agony in her chest, and tried not to scream. This was what Kaelor had been trying to protect her from. This connection that meant his pain became hers, his struggles became hers, his potential death became hers. If Varric killed him, the bond would tear her apart. If he lost control and became the beast everyone feared, she'd feel it happen, would feel him slip away into darkness and know she'd been the catalyst. I should have left, should have taken the coin and run, should have listened to everyone who told me this would end in blood. The bond flared with sudden, searing pain. Something had gone wrong. Something had... Seraphine sat up, gasping, pressing a hand to her ribs where phantom agony bloomed like fire. Through the bond, she felt Kaelor stumble, felt his strength faltering, felt the beast inside him rising as control slipped through his fingers like water. He was losing, not because he was weaker or less skilled, but because he was fighting himself as much as he was fighting Varric. Every blow he landed, every moment of violence, fed the darkness he'd spent 20 years trying to contain, and the more he fought, the stronger it got, until soon there would be nothing left of the man, and only the monster would remain. And Seraphine was locked in a room, useless and helpless, while fate she'd demanded played out exactly the way everyone had warned her it would. She screamed, wordless, furious, aimed at gods who'd tied her soul to someone she couldn't save. Then she started searching the room for anything she could use to break down the door. Weapons hung on the walls, swords too heavy for her to lift, axes meant for hands twice the size of hers. She grabbed a dagger, small enough to wield, and went to work on the lock. Picked at it with shaking hands, cursing her own incompetence, feeling the bond spike with pain every few seconds as the fight continued. The lock didn't budge. Seraphine threw the dagger across the room and looked at the window. Too narrow to climb through, too high to jump. She was trapped, completely and utterly trapped, and through the bond she could feel Kaelor slipping further away with every passing second. Think. There has to be something, some way to help him that doesn't involve being physically present. The bond. It connected them, carried sensation and emotion and everything between their souls, which meant it went both ways. If she could feel his pain, maybe he could feel her strength, her certainty, her absolute refusal to let him fall to darkness alone. Seraphine pressed both hands to her chest, feeling the bond pulse beneath her palms, and reached. Not physically, not with her body, but with everything she was, every ounce of will and determination and stubborn love that had kept her alive through being sold and collared and locked away. She gathered it all and shoved it down the bond toward Kaelor like light blazing through shadows. I'm here. I'm with you. You're not alone. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the bond exploded open. Everything Kaelor had been blocking, everything he'd kept locked down to protect her, came flooding through in a torrent that nearly knocked Seraphine to her knees. His pain, yes, but also his rage, his fear, his desperate love for her mixed with self-loathing so deep it felt like drowning. And underneath it all, the beast. Not evil. Not some separate entity trying to destroy him. Just trauma given form. Pain and abuse and survival instinct twisted into something feral and violent because that's what his father had made it. The beast was Kaelor, had always been Kaelor. The part of him that had endured when endurance should have been impossible. The part that had kept him alive through torture and starvation and silver chains. The part he'd been taught to hate instead of heal. Seraphine understood in that crystalline moment what no one else had seen. Kaelor wasn't fighting to suppress the beast. He was fighting himself, trying to destroy the very thing that had saved him because he'd been told his entire life that strength born from suffering was something to be ashamed of. She sent one thought down the bond, clear and absolute. Stop fighting yourself. You're not the monster they made you believe you are. The bond shuddered. She felt Kaelor's shock, felt him stumble in the fight, felt Varric press the advantage with brutal efficiency. Then, you need to leave. Right now, take Gareth and run. I can't hold this much longer. I'm not leaving you. Seraphine, please. No. You want to protect me? Then stop trying to tear yourself apart and fight with everything you have. Use the beast. Use the rage. Use every single thing your father tried to beat out of you and prove he was wrong. You're not broken. You're not damaged. You're just hurt. And hurt heals. So stop running from the parts of yourself you think are monstrous and embrace them. If I do that, I might kill him. Then kill him. He's trying to take your throne and use me as an excuse. He's threatened me, grabbed me, locked me away. He deserves whatever you do to him, so stop holding back and finish this. Silence through the bond. Then, so quiet she almost missed it. I'm afraid. I know, do it anyway. Seraphine felt the moment Kaelor made his choice, felt him stop fighting the darkness inside and instead wrap both hands around it. Felt the beast surge forward, not as an enemy to suppress, but as a weapon to wield. Felt his wolf and his man and his trauma-born strength merge into something that had never been whole before. The pain through the bond vanished, replaced by power so absolute it felt like standing in a storm. Then the bond went silent, not shut down, just focused entirely on the fight. Seraphine sank onto the bed with tears streaming down her face and her hands pressed to her chest where the connection pulsed steady and strong. She'd done all she could. The rest was up to him. Minutes passed like hours. Seraphine counted heartbeats, listened to silence, waited for the bond to tell her whether she'd just helped save him or condemned him to become exactly what he'd always feared. Footsteps in the corridor, running, fast. Multiple people. The lock clicked. The door flew open. Gareth stood there with blood on his face and something like awe in his dark eyes. "You need to see this," he said. Seraphine ran. Through corridors packed with warriors all heading the same direction. Downstairs that emptied into the great hall where 200 people stood in absolute silence, staring at the scene before them. Varric knelt in the center of the hall with blood pouring from his nose, his mouth, a gash across his ribs. His formal wear was shredded. His gray eyes were wide with shock and something that looked almost like fear. And standing over him with one hand fisted in his brother's hair, Kaelor. The king looked like violence incarnate. Blood covered him, his own and Varric's mixed together until there was no telling where one ended and the other began. His shirt was gone, torn away during the fight. Claw marks raked across his chest from wounds that were already healing. His eyes burned amber gold, his wolf so close to the surface that fur rippled beneath his skin without fully shifting. But he was in control. That was the part that made Seraphine's breath catch. Despite the blood, despite the violence, despite the beast riding him hard enough that she could feel it through the bond, Kaelor was completely, utterly in control. He saw her enter. Their eyes met across the hall, and Seraphine watched something in his expression soften just slightly. "Yield," Kaelor said to his brother, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "Never." Varric spat blood. "Kill me if you want. Prove you're the monster everyone believes you are. But I'll never acknowledge a king who's ruled by his cock instead of his crown." Kaelor's hand tightened in Varric's hair, yanking his head back to expose his throat. For one terrible moment, Seraphine thought he would do it. Would tear out his brother's throat the same way he'd killed their father. Would prove every fear, every warning, every reason she should have run. Instead, he leaned down and spoke directly into Varric's ear, too quiet for anyone else to hear, but Seraphine caught it through the bond. "I don't need to kill you to prove I'm stronger. I just need you to remember this moment. Remember what it felt like to lose. Remember that the next time you question whether the beast makes me weak or strong. And then ask yourself, Do you really want to test me again? He released Varric, let him collapse onto the blood-stained floor, then straightened and addressed the hall at large. The challenge has been met. I retain the throne. Anyone else want to question my fitness to rule? Silence. Absolute terrified silence. Kaler's eyes swept the crowd, and Seraphine watched warriors who'd stood with Varric shrink back, watched council members who'd voted for his removal suddenly find their boots fascinating, watched loyalty reassert itself through fear and respect, and the undeniable proof that their king was exactly as dangerous as the stories claimed. Good. Kaler moved toward the doors toward Seraphine, his amber gold eyes locked on her face. Council dismissed. Warriors returned to posts, and someone get my brother a healer before he bleeds out on my floor. He walked past Seraphine without stopping, without speaking, but his hand brushed hers for half a second, just long enough for the bond between them to flare with exhaustion and relief, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Then he was gone, disappearing into the corridors beyond the hall, leaving chaos and whispers, and Varric bleeding on stone in his wake. Gareth appeared at Seraphine's elbow. Come on, he'll want you safe while he cleans up this mess. Where's he going? Probably to his chambers, to crash and burn, and try to convince himself he didn't just prove every fear right by nearly killing his own brother. Gareth's expression was grim. Give him an hour, then go to him. He won't ask for you, but he'll need you. Trust me. Seraphine nodded, numb with relief and terror and the overwhelming certainty that everything had just changed. Kaler had embraced the beast, had stopped fighting himself long enough to win. But winning didn't mean he was okay. Didn't mean the darkness was gone or the trauma was healed or any of the fundamental problems that had kept them apart were solved. It just meant they both survived the night. The rest, figuring out how to live with what they'd become, how to build something real from a bond forged in blood and violence. That started tomorrow, if they could both survive that long. Gareth led her back to his quarters but didn't lock the door this time. Just gave her a look that said, stay put for now, and left. Seraphine sank onto the bed and let her hand shake, let the adrenaline drain, let herself feel every bruise and ache and moment of terror she'd suppressed while the bond carried her through Kaler's fight. She'd told him to embrace the beast, had pushed him to stop holding back, had gambled that strength and darkness could coexist without destroying everything they touched. And it had worked. But gods, the cost! She could still feel him through the bond, exhausted, hurting, barely holding himself together. Could feel him pacing in chambers she'd never seen, trying to process what he'd done, what he'd become, what it meant that he'd nearly killed his brother and felt satisfaction instead of remorse. Seraphine waited the hour Gareth had suggested. Then she stood, smoothed her wrinkled dress, and went to find the king she'd just helped break free from his own chains, whether he wanted her to or not. The corridors were empty now. Warriors had returned to posts. Servants had vanished. The fortress felt hollowed out, waiting to see what would rise from the ashes of tonight's violence. Seraphine followed the bond like a compass pointing home, through halls she half recognized, upstairs that spiraled into towers, until finally stopping at a door that radiated his scent so strongly it made her wolf whimper. She knocked. Go away, Gareth. Seraphine opened the door anyway. Kaler stood by a window with his back to her, shirtless and covered in half-healed wounds that painted his skin in shades of red and black. Blood still streaked his hair. His hands gripped the window frame so hard his knuckles were white. He didn't turn around. I told you to stay in Gareth's quarters. And I didn't listen. Seems to be a pattern with us. Seraphine, I'm not leaving. She closed the door behind her, cutting off any retreat. You can order me out, throw me out, lock me up again, but I'm not going anywhere until we talk about what just happened. Kaler's shoulders tensed. What's there to talk about? I nearly killed my brother, proved every person who called me a monster right, became exactly what my father wanted to beat out of me. That enough conversation for you? You won. I lost control. No. Seraphine crossed to him, watching his reflection in the window glass. You stopped fighting yourself. There's a difference. Control isn't about suppression, Kaler. It's about choice. And you chose not to kill him. Chose to show mercy when you could have ended it. That's not losing control. That's mastering it. You don't know what it felt like. His voice was raw. To let that darkness rise. to feel the beast take over and want it, to almost enjoy the violence. That's not mastery. That's becoming the thing everyone fears. Or it's accepting that strength doesn't have to be gentle to be good, that survival instinct doesn't make you a monster, that maybe the beast inside you was never the enemy, it was just the part of you trying to keep you alive when everything else wanted you dead. Kaylor finally turned to face her. His amber gold eyes were haunted, his face pale beneath the blood and exhaustion. You told me to embrace it, to stop holding back. Do you have any idea what you asked me to risk? Yes. Seraphine met his eyes without flinching. Everything. I asked you to risk everything. Your control, your kingdom, your soul. And you did it. For me. To survive. To prove that maybe, just maybe, you could have both. The beast and the man, the darkness and the light. So stop looking at me like I made you do something unforgivable and start accepting that what happened tonight was necessary. Necessary. He laughed, bitter and broken. My brother is in the healing rooms with wounds that'll scar. Half my council thinks I'm unstable, and the woman I'm bonded to just watched me nearly tear out my own blood's throat. How is any of that necessary? Because now you know. Seraphine closed the distance between them until she could feel heat radiating from his skin. You know you can embrace the beast without losing yourself. Know you can fight with everything you have and still choose mercy. Know that the darkness inside you doesn't have to destroy everything you touch. That's what tonight proved. Not that you're a monster, but that you're strong enough to wield monstrous power without becoming it. Kaylor stared at her like she'd just rewritten every truth he'd built his life around. His hand came up, trembling, and touched her face with a gentleness that contradicted every violent thing he'd done in the past hour. You're insane, he whispered. I'm yours. She pressed her hand over his, holding it against her cheek. Fated, chosen, bound by something neither of us asked for but both of us feel. So stop trying to protect me from what you are, and start trusting that maybe I'm strong enough to stand beside it. And if you're not, if the beast wins someday and then I'll die knowing I chose this, chose you, chose to fight for something impossible instead of settling for safety. Seraphine turned her head, pressed her lips to his palm. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're stronger than you believe. And I think together we might actually survive what's coming. For a long moment, Kaylor said nothing, just stood there with her hand holding his against her face, with blood drying on his skin and wounds healing beneath muscle and bone. The bond between them pulsed steady and strong, carrying everything they couldn't say, fear and hope, and desperate, impossible love tangled together. Then he pulled her close, wrapped both arms around her, and buried his face in her hair. I'm so tired, he whispered against her temple. So fucking tired of fighting myself. Then stop, just for tonight. Let yourself rest. I can't. You can. The kingdom is secure. Your throne is safe. Varric's been dealt with. There's nothing that can't wait until morning. Seraphine pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Let me help you, please. Kaylor searched her face like he was looking for proof this was real. That she was real. That he hadn't just hallucinated the one person in the world who looked at his darkness and didn't run screaming. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. Stay with me tonight. I'm not going anywhere. He led her deeper into his chambers, past the sitting area to a bedroom that was surprisingly simple. A bed large enough for someone his size. A wardrobe. A table covered in maps and reports. Nothing decorative, nothing personal, just the bare minimum needed to function. Kaylor sat on the edge of the bed like his legs had finally given out. Seraphine knelt in front of him, carefully examining wounds that were already knitting back together but still looked painful. You need a healer, she said. I need you more. The words hit her harder than any violence. Seraphine looked up at this man, this king, this monster, this broken, beautiful thing, and felt something in her chest click into place. Then you have me. For tonight. For tomorrow. For however long this impossible thing between us lasts. Kaylor's hand tangled in her hair, tilting her face up. It's going to be hard. Painful. There will be nights when the beast rises and I'll have to fight it down. Mornings when I wake up covered in blood from shifts I barely remember. Days when ruling this kingdom feels impossible and the only thing keeping me sane is me. I know. And I'll be there through all of it, the darkness and the light and everything between. She covered his hand with hers. But right now, you need to rest, so lie down. Let me watch over you for once. And tomorrow we'll figure out how to build something real from this mess we've made. Kaler obeyed like he'd used up every ounce of will just getting through the fight. He lay back on the bed, and Seraphine climbed in beside him, curling against his side, careful of wounds that were still healing. His arm came around her automatically, pulling her close, and through the bond she felt his exhaustion finally win. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair, already half asleep. "For what? For not giving up on me? For staying when everyone else would have run? For seeing something in me worth fighting for when I'd stopped believing it existed?" Seraphine pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "Sleep, Kaylor. I'll be here when you wake up." And he did sleep. Dropped into unconsciousness like a stone into water, his breathing evening out, his grip on her loosening slightly as his body finally accepted that the fight was over and he'd survived. Seraphine stayed awake longer, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the bond pulse between them, with warmth instead of pain for the first time since they'd met. They'd survived tonight, barely, desperately, at a cost she couldn't fully calculate yet. But they'd survived. And tomorrow they would face whatever came next, together. Outside the window, dawn was beginning to break over Blackmoor's iron fortress, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the healing rooms, Varric was probably plotting his next move. Somewhere in the barracks, warriors were whispering about their king who'd embraced the beast and won. Somewhere in the shadows, new threats were gathering, drawn by the scent of blood and change, and power-shifting hands. But here, in this room, in this bed, with this impossible man wrapped around her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the world. Here, Seraphine felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Hope. That maybe, just maybe, love really was stronger than darkness. That maybe fate had been right to tie her soul to his. That maybe the monster everyone feared was just a man who'd never been given permission to be anything else. And as sleep finally claimed her, pulling her down into dreams where golden eyes met hers, and the word mate sounded like a promise instead of a curse, Seraphine's last conscious thought was simple. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together, even if it kills us. Especially if it kills us. Because that's what love is, choosing someone even when the smart choice is to run. And I choose you, Kaler Draven. Monster, king, broken thing, I choose you. The bond flared once, warm and steady and absolutely certain, then settled into a rhythm that matched their breathing. Two hearts beating as one, two souls bound by something stronger than fate. Two people who should have destroyed each other, learning instead how to. Seraphine woke to sunlight cutting across her face and the distant sound of steel on steel. Warriors training in the yards below. The fortress returning to its rhythm, like the violence of the previous night, had been nothing more than a bad dream. But the weight of Kylor's arm across her waist, and the fading scent of blood on his skin reminded her that everything had been terribly, devastatingly real. She turned her head to find him already awake, watching her with eyes that had shifted back to molten gold sometime during the night. The wounds on his chest had healed to angry red lines. The exhaustion that had carved shadows beneath his eyes had faded slightly, though not entirely. He looked less like a man on the edge of collapse and more like a king who'd survived something that should have killed him. "You stayed," he said quietly. "I told you I would." People say a lot of things they don't mean when they're trying to calm someone down. His thumb traced circles on her hip through the fabric of her dress, the touch absent and intimate at once. "I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd run the moment I fell asleep." "Where would I go?" Seraphine asked. "This is where fate put me, where the bond tied me, where I chose to be. Running doesn't change any of that." Kaler's expression shifted, something between relief and pain. "I almost killed him. My own brother. I had him on the ground, and every instinct was screaming at me to finish it, to eliminate the threat, to make sure he could never challenge me again. And for a second, just a second, I wanted to. Not because I had to, because I wanted to watch the life leave his eyes. But you didn't, only because you were watching." His hand stilled on her hip. "Because I could feel you through the bond, and I knew if I became that person, the one who kills family for convenience, I'd lose you. And losing you was worse than letting him live. Seraphine pushed up on one elbow, looking down at him. You're giving me too much credit. The choice was yours, Kaylor. I was just witness to it. You chose mercy because somewhere underneath all the trauma and darkness, you're still capable of it. That's what matters. Is it? His jaw tightened. Because it doesn't feel like mercy. It feels like weakness. Like I let emotion cloud my judgment when a real king would have. A real king knows when to show strength and when to show restraint. You proved you could destroy him. That was the strength. Choosing not to was the restraint. Both matter. Both make you fit to rule. She leaned down, pressed her forehead to his. Stop second-guessing yourself. The fight is over. You won. Now we deal with what comes after. What came after arrived an hour later in the form of Gareth, knocking on the door with news that the council was demanding an audience. Kaylor dressed in fresh leather and a coat that hid most of the healing wounds, every inch the warrior king despite the tension carved into his shoulders. Seraphine wore the same wrinkled gray dress because it was all she had, and followed him through corridors that felt different in daylight, less threatening, just old stone and history and the weight of centuries pressing down. The council chamber was smaller than the Great Hall, designed for strategy rather than spectacle. A circular table dominated the center with chairs for 20 council members. Maps covered the walls. Weapons hung in cases like museum pieces. And standing around that table, waiting with expressions ranging from hostile to cautious, were the people who helped run Blackmore. Varric sat at the far end with bandages wrapped around his ribs and a bruise darkening half his face. His gray eyes tracked Kaylor's entrance with calculation that hadn't dimmed despite the beating he'd taken. Mira stood near him, her healer's bag at her feet, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. The rest of the council, military advisors, trade representatives, the fortress steward, occupied the remaining seats with varying degrees of comfort. Kaylor didn't sit, just stood at the head of the table with Seraphine slightly behind him, letting his presence fill the room like a physical force. You called this meeting, he said to the council at large. So talk. One of the older advisors, a woman named Celeste with silver hair and eyes sharp enough to cut, cleared her throat. We need clarity, Your Majesty, about what happened last night, about your intentions regarding the Omega, about whether the kingdom can expect stability or if we're going to continue having emergency challenges every time someone questions your judgment. My judgment is sound. Is it? Varric's voice was cold despite the pain he had to be in. You nearly killed me over a bond you refused to complete. Nearly tore this fortress apart because you can't decide whether to claim her or send her away. That's not sound judgment, brother. That's instability wearing a crown. I beat you in single combat. By every law this kingdom recognizes, that makes the question of my fitness to rule settled. Or do you want to challenge me again? See if this time I'm feeling merciful. Varric's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Celeste tried again. We're not questioning the legitimacy of your victory, Your Majesty. We're questioning what happens next. The bond between you and the Omega is affecting your decisions, your focus, your ability to lead without personal interests clouding your judgment. So we're asking, plainly and without political maneuvering, what are your intentions? Will you complete the bond, send her away, keep her here in this limbo where she's neither claimed nor free? Every eye in the room turned to Seraphine. She felt the weight of their scrutiny like hands pressing against her skin, judging, evaluating, waiting to see if she would break under pressure or stand her ground. Kaylor spoke before she could. My intentions are my own business. With respect, they're not. Another council member, a military advisor named Thorne, leaned forward. Your personal life becomes kingdom business the moment it affects our security. And an unclaimed mate in the fortress is a vulnerability. Other packs will see it as weakness. Raiders will test our borders thinking you're distracted. Your own warriors will question whether you're capable of making hard choices when emotions are involved. My emotions didn't stop me from winning a war in the north. Didn't stop me from putting down a coup. Didn't stop me from doing every single thing this kingdom has asked of me for the past 10 years. So forgive me if I don't accept the premise that caring about someone makes me weak. No one's saying caring makes you weak, Celeste said carefully. We're saying refusing to act on that care, keeping her here but not claiming her, protecting her but not bonding with her, creates uncertainty. And uncertainty in leadership gets people killed. Silence crashed over the room. Seraphine could feel the bond pulsing in her chest, could sense Kaylor's frustration mixing with something darker. He was being backed into a corner, forced to make a decision he'd been avoiding since the moment their eyes met across that blood-red clearing. Claim her and risk everything Mira had warned about, losing control, hurting her, becoming the monster his father had tried to create, or send her away and live with the bond slowly tearing them both apart, proving that even fate's choices could be refused through sheer stubborn will. Neither option was good. Both would cost something precious. Seraphine stepped forward before Kaylor could respond. "May I speak?" The council members exchanged glances. Varric's expression showed something like amusement, like he was waiting for her to say something that would prove his point about her being a distraction. Kaylor's hand found hers squeezed once, a warning or a permission, she couldn't tell which. "Speak," Celeste said. Seraphine took a breath, held it, let it out slowly. "You're right. I am a vulnerability, an unbonded Omega with no training, no political value, no skills that benefit this kingdom. I'm the reason your king has been distracted, the reason your council is divided, the reason half of you think he's unfit to rule. So let me make this easier for everyone." She turned to Kaylor, met his golden eyes without flinching. "I'm leaving. Today. Right now. You can give me the coin and supplies or not. I don't care. But I'm not staying here and being the excuse people use to question you. I'm not being the weakness that gets warriors killed or the distraction that loses wars. I'm just done." Kaylor's hand tightened on hers hard enough to hurt. "Seraphine, you were right the first night. I should have taken what you offered and run. Should have listened to everyone who told me this would end badly. Should have been smart instead of stubborn." She pulled her hand free, took a step back. "So I'm being smart now. I'm leaving. And you're going to let me because it's what's best for the kingdom you've sacrificed everything to protect." She turned toward the door before she could see his expression, before the bond could betray how much this was costing her, before anyone in that room could watch her break. "Stop!" Kaylor's voice cut through the chamber like a blade through silk. Seraphine stopped, her hand on the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You're not leaving," he said quietly. "Not now. Not today. Not because some council thinks you're a distraction or because my brother wants to prove a point about weakness. You're staying, and I'm claiming you, right here, right now, in front of everyone who thinks the bond makes me unfit to rule." The chamber erupted, council members shouting, Varric on his feet despite his injuries, Celeste demanding order. Through it all, Kaylor just stared at Seraphine's back with something like desperation in his eyes. "You don't have to do this," Seraphine said without turning around. "Yes, I do. Because you're right. I've been a coward, hiding behind noble reasons and fear and every excuse I could find to avoid admitting what I've known since the moment I saw you. You're mine, chosen by fate or the gods or whatever force binds souls together. And I'm done pretending I can live without you just because I'm scared of what accepting you might cost." Seraphine turned slowly. "What about the beast? What about losing control? What about all the reasons you gave me for why this was impossible?" "Still there, still terrifying, still might happen." Kaylor crossed to her, stopping close enough that she could see the war raging in his expression. "But I'd rather risk becoming a monster with you beside me than guarantee becoming one by pushing you away. At least if I fall, you'll be there to see it, to fight it, to maybe, God's willing, pull me back before I lose myself completely. That's a lot of faith to put in someone you barely know. I know enough. I know you called me a coward to my face and lived. Know you refused to leave even when staying meant risking your life. Know you reached through the bond last night and gave me the strength to stop fighting myself. That's more than enough." His hand came up, cupped her face with a gentleness that contradicted every violent thing he was capable of. "So I'm asking you, Seraphine Vale, will you accept this bond? Let me claim you properly, completely, the way I should have done the first night instead of being too afraid to try? Will you stand beside a broken king and help him become something better than the monster his father created?" The chamber had gone silent, every council member watching, Varric's expression unreadable, Mira's eyes suspiciously bright. Gareth standing by the door with something like pride on his scarred face. Seraphine looked at Kaylor, at this impossible man who'd fought wars and survived abuse and built a kingdom on discipline and pain, and felt the bond in her chest sing with absolute certainty. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll accept the bond. Accept you. Accept everything that comes with choosing this impossible thing between us." Kaylor's control shattered. He pulled her close and kissed her like she was air and he was drowning, like she was the answer to every question he'd been too afraid to ask, like she was salvation and destruction wrapped into one unbonded Omega who'd walked into his life and refused to leave when any sane person would have run screaming. The bond exploded open between them. Every wall he'd built, every barrier he'd maintained, every desperate attempt to protect her by keeping distance, all of it came crashing down as their souls finally, completely, irrevocably merged. Seraphine felt everything, his pain, his fear, his love so fierce it felt like burning, his memories of abuse and survival, and the slow, agonizing process of becoming someone strong enough to rule, while staying sane enough to remember why ruling mattered. His wolf recognizing hers with joy so pure it made her gasp. And underneath it all, the beast. The darkness he'd fought for 20 years. But now, seen through the lens of complete honesty, it didn't look like a monster anymore. Just trauma, given teeth. Pain that had learned to fight back. Survival instinct that refused to be broken no matter how hard his father had tried. Seraphine dove into that darkness the same way she had during the fight. Not to destroy it, not to suppress it, just to acknowledge it. To wrap her own strength around it and whisper the words Kaylor had never heard. "You're allowed to exist. You kept him alive when nothing else could. You're not evil. You're not wrong. You're just hurt. And hurt can heal if you let it." The beast, his wolf, his trauma, his survival-born strength shuddered beneath her touch. Then slowly, it curled around her presence like a wounded animal finally finding safety. Not tamed, not defeated, just accepted, acknowledged, given permission to exist without being the enemy. Kaylor pulled back from the kiss with tears streaming down his face. "How did you it? Upao, because I see you, all of you, the king and the man and the beast and the broken pieces you think are too damaged to love. And I love all of it, even the parts that scare you, even the parts you think make you monstrous. I love all of it because it's you." He kissed her again, softer this time, like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. When he finally released her, he turned to the council with his hand still tangled in hers. "I'm claiming Seraphine Vale as my mate and queen. The bond will be completed tonight under the full moon. Anyone who has a problem with that can challenge me the same way my brother did. Otherwise," his eyes swept the room, "get used to it. She's not going anywhere. And neither am I." Celeste stood slowly. "The council acknowledges your claim, Your Majesty, and welcomes the future queen." She inclined her head to Seraphine. "May your bond bring strength to Blackmore." The other council members echoed the sentiment with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Varric said nothing, just sat there with his gray eyes burning with calculation that promised this wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, for this moment, it was enough. The meeting dissolved into logistics, plans for a formal bonding ceremony, discussions about security during the full moon, Celeste pulling Seraphine aside to explain the responsibilities that came with being queen, the expectations, the reality that ruling Blackmore meant making choices that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Seraphine listened with half her attention, the rest focused on the bond pulsing warm and steady in her chest. On Kaylor across the room, discussing border defenses with his military advisors while sneaking glances at her like he still couldn't quite believe she'd said yes. On the future they were choosing together despite every rational reason to walk away. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. The full moon rose that night over Blackmore's iron fortress, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Warriors gathered in the courtyard, not all of them, but enough to witness what would either be a new beginning or a spectacular disaster. Mira had prepared ceremonial markings, ancient symbols meant to honor the bond being completed. Gareth stood as witness, his scarred face solemn. Even Varric appeared, leaning against a wall with his ribs still bandaged, watching with an expression Seraphine couldn't decipher. Kaylor stood in the center of the courtyard wearing nothing but leather pants and the silver marks Mira had painted across his chest. The moonlight caught in his golden eyes, making them glow. His wolf was close to the surface. Seraphine could feel it through the bond, could sense how hard he was fighting to maintain control long enough to complete the ceremony. She approached him wearing a simple white dress that one of the servants had found. her hair loose around her shoulders, her feet bare against cold stone. The bond between them pulled taut as a bowstring, singing with anticipation. "Last chance to run," Kaylor said quietly as she stopped in front of him. "Stop giving me outs. I'm staying. Even knowing what might happen, what I might become, especially knowing." Seraphine reached up, traced the silver marks on his chest. "We do this together. Whatever comes after, the bees, the darkness, the full moons where you struggle to hold on, we face it together. That's what the bond means. Not that you're suddenly fixed or safe or any less dangerous, just that you're not alone anymore." Kaylor caught her hand, pressed it flat against his heart. "I'm going to shift. When I do, the bond will complete. You'll feel everything. The wolf, the beast, the parts of me I've kept locked away for 20 years. It's going to hurt. And if at any point you change your mind, if you can't handle what you see, you need to run. Promise me you'll run if it becomes too much. I'm not running. Not from you. Not from this." She stood on her toes, kissed him softly. "Trust me, Kaylor. Trust that I'm strong enough to stand beside your darkness without being consumed by it." He searched her face for one more moment. Then he nodded, stepped back, and let the shift take him. Seraphine had never seen an alpha shift before. Not completely. Not without restraint. It was brutal and beautiful and utterly terrifying. Bones breaking and reforming, muscle stretching, skin rippling as fur erupted across flesh. Kaylor's human form collapsed and rose again as something massive and powerful and absolutely wild. The wolf that stood before her was easily twice the size of any normal animal. Black fur shot through with silver, eyes that burned amber gold in the moonlight, teeth that could tear through steel, and radiating from every inch of him, power. Raw, primal, barely contained power that made every warrior in the courtyard take an involuntary step back. The beast had arrived, and it was staring at Seraphine with an intensity that should have sent her running. She held her ground. The wolf circled her slowly, testing, evaluating. She could feel Kaylor inside it, still present, still conscious, but sharing space with something more ancient. The trauma-born strength that had kept him alive through torture and abuse. The survival instinct that knew only violence and dominance, and eliminating threats before they could strike. The beast growled low in its throat, and Seraphine felt the bond shiver with warning. This was the moment, the test. Would she run? Would she show fear? Would she prove everyone right who said she wasn't strong enough to handle what Kaylor truly was? Seraphine dropped to her knees, not in submission, not in fear, but in acknowledgement. Meeting the wolf at eye level, showing respect without surrender. "I see you," she said quietly. "I know what you are, what you've done, what you're capable of, and I'm not afraid. You kept him alive when no one else could, protected him when the world tried to break him, made him strong enough to survive becoming king. So I'm not here to fight you or tame you or make you into something gentler. I'm just here to stand beside you and help carry the weight you've been bearing alone." The wolf stopped circling, stared at her with those amber gold eyes, and Seraphine felt the exact moment Kaylor stopped fighting the beast and instead let them merge completely. The shift reversed in a cascade of breaking bones and reforming muscle. Kaylor rose from where the wolf had stood, gasping, covered in sweat, his eyes still burning with residual amber. He reached for Seraphine with shaking hands, pulled her against his chest, and the bond between them snapped into place with enough force to drive them both to their knees. Everything opened, every memory, every emotion, every piece of their souls laid bare and tangling together. Seraphine felt his childhood, the beatings, the starvation, the silver chains. Felt the moment he killed his father, and the guilt that had followed. Felt 20 years of ruling through discipline and pain, and the constant terror that he would become the monster everyone expected. And Kaylor felt her, the isolation, the years locked away, the moment she was sold like livestock. Felt her terror during transport and her rage at being treated as property. Felt her decision to stay in Blackmore, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because for the first time in her life someone had given her a real choice. The bond settled, solidified, became permanent. Seraphine opened her eyes to find Kaylor staring at her with wonder written across every line of his face. "You're still here," he whispered. "Where else would I be?" "Anywhere, everywhere. You saw what I am and you're still yours. I'm yours. Completely. irrevocably, bound by something stronger than fear or trauma or any darkness you think defines you. She pressed her forehead to his. We're bonded now. Properly. The way we were always meant to be. So stop waiting for me to run and start accepting that I'm not going anywhere. Around them, the courtyard erupted in cheers. Warriors who'd witnessed the bonding celebrating with the kind of enthusiasm that came from seeing their king finally claim something for himself instead of just sacrificing for the kingdom. Mira smiled through tears. Gareth actually laughed. Even some of Varric's supporters looked grudgingly impressed that Seraphine had survived the beast's scrutiny without flinching. Varric himself simply watched with those cold gray eyes, then turned and disappeared into the fortress. Not defeated, just waiting, biding his time until the next opportunity to prove his point about weakness and distraction. But tonight wasn't about him. Tonight was about two souls finally acknowledging what fate had decided for them. About a broken king learning that love didn't require perfection. About an Omega who'd been treated as property discovering she was worth fighting for. Kaylor stood, pulling Seraphine up with him, and addressed the crowd. Blackmoor has a queen. Anyone who disrespects her, threatens her, or questions her place beside me will answer to me personally. Spread the word. Then he swept her into his arms and carried her through the cheering warriors, through corridors that felt less cold now, upstairs to chambers that would become theirs instead of just his. He set her down gently in the bedroom where she'd watched him sleep the previous night, and this time when he looked at her, there was no fear in his eyes, just love. Fierce and broken and absolutely real. I'm going to hurt you, he said quietly, not intentionally, but there will be nights when the beast rises and I struggle to maintain control. Mornings when I wake up from nightmares covered in sweat and can't remember where I am. Days when ruling this kingdom becomes too much, and I take out my frustration on everyone around me, including you. I'm going to be difficult and damaged and probably impossible to live with sometimes. I know. Seraphine reached up, touched his face. And I'm going to be stubborn and reckless and probably make decisions that terrify you because I don't always think before I act. I'm going to question you when you're wrong and fight you when you're being unreasonable and refuse to just sit quietly while you try to protect me from things I'm strong enough to handle. We're both going to be difficult. So this is going to be a disaster. Probably, she smiled. But it's our disaster, built on choice instead of obligation, on love instead of duty. On two people deciding that maybe, just maybe, broken things can fit together and create something beautiful. Kaylor kissed her then, deep and thorough and claiming in a way that made the bond sing. When he finally pulled back, his eyes had shifted to amber gold again, his wolf rising to the surface with need that had nothing to do with violence. I need you, he said roughly. Need to complete this bond fully. Need to feel you in every way possible. Then take me. I'm yours, completely. And he did. Slowly, reverently, like she was something precious he'd been given permission to worship. The bond blazed between them, translating every touch into shared sensation, every kiss into doubled pleasure. They moved together like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours, like their souls had known each other long before their bodies met, like fate had been right all along about tying them together. When it was over, they lay tangled in sheets with moonlight cutting across their skin and the bond pulsing steady and strong between them. Kaylor's hand traced idle patterns on Seraphine's hip, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. I love you, he said quietly. I know I should have said it before the bonding, should have made grand declarations and romantic gestures, but I'm saying it now. I love you, Seraphine, every stubborn, reckless, impossibly brave part of you. I love you too. She pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. My monster king, my broken warrior, my impossible choice that turned out to be the only real one I ever made. They slept eventually, wrapped around each other like neither could bear to be separate even in unconsciousness. And when dawn came gray and cold through the windows, when reality returned with all its demands and dangers and unresolved conflicts, they faced it together. Seraphine learned what it meant to be queen of a kingdom built on violence and survival. Learned to navigate council meetings where men twice her age questioned her judgment. Learned to stand beside Kaylor during audiences and make decisions that would affect hundreds of lives. Learned that strength wasn't about never being afraid. It was about being terrified and choosing to act anyway. She healed the fortress in small ways. Injured warriors who'd been told to walk it off found themselves in Mira's healing rooms getting proper treatment. Children who'd grown up knowing only fear discovered that their queen actually smiled and played and treated them like people instead of future soldiers. Servants who'd been invisible for decades suddenly mattered because Seraphine remembered their names and thanked them for their work. Blackmore didn't transform overnight. Violence was still the language most warriors spoke. Fear was still the tool that maintained order, but slowly, gradually, cracks appeared in the iron facade. Warriors laughed more. Tension eased. The fortress that had felt like a prison began to feel like something that might eventually become a home. Kaylor struggled. There were nights when the beast rose and he locked himself away until dawn, terrified of hurting her. Mornings when he woke from nightmares screaming. Full moons that tested his control so severely, Seraphine had to use the bond to pull him back from the edge. But through it all, he fought. Not to suppress the darkness, but to integrate it. To accept that trauma and strength could coexist without one destroying the other. And Seraphine stood beside him through every moment. Not as a savior or a cure, but as a partner who understood that healing wasn't linear and love wasn't about fixing broken people. It was about standing with them while they figured out how to fix themselves. Varric remained a threat. Subtle. Patient. Waiting for the moment when Kaylor's guard dropped or Seraphine made a mistake he could exploit, but he never challenged openly again. Just watched from the shadows with those calculating gray eyes, plotting whatever move would finally prove his brother unfit to rule. 6 months after the bonding, Seraphine stood on the fortress walls watching dawn break over Blackmore's territory. The land stretched out before her, dark forests and mountains that cut the horizon like teeth against the sky. Dangerous. Beautiful. Home. Kaylor appeared beside her, sliding an arm around her waist, pulling her against his side. Couldn't sleep? Too much on my mind. Want to talk about it? Not really. Just needed to see this. Remember why we're fighting so hard to build something better? She leaned into him, feeling the bond pulse warm and steady. Do you ever regret it? Claiming me? Choosing this over the control you had before? Every day. At her sharp look, he smiled. I regret that I didn't do it sooner. That I wasted nights trying to protect you from something you were strong enough to handle. That I let fear control me when I should have trusted fate knew what it was doing when it tied us together. His hand found hers, laced their fingers. But the choice itself, the bond? You? Never. Not even on the worst days when the beast rises and I'm terrified I'll hurt you. Because even at my worst, you see something worth loving. And that makes everything else bearable. Seraphine turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him. Good answer. I have my moments. They stood there as the sun climbed higher, painting the fortress in shades of gold that softened its harsh edges. Below them, warriors trained. Servants prepared breakfast. The fortress lived and breathed and continued its eternal cycle of survival. But now, finally, there was something more than just survival. There was hope. Hope that broken kings could heal without losing their strength. Hope that Omegas sold as payment could become queens who changed kingdoms. Hope that love forged in blood and violence could endure through darkness and emerge stronger on the other side. Hope that two impossible people choosing each other against all reason might actually be enough to transform something built on fear into something sustained by compassion. It wouldn't be easy. There would be more battles, more struggles, more nights when the beast rose and tested everything they'd built. Varric would make his move eventually, forcing another confrontation. Other threats would emerge from the shadows, drawn by rumors of a king who'd finally found something worth protecting more than his crown. But they would face it all together, king and queen, alpha and omega, monster and the woman who'd looked into his darkness and refused to flinch. Two souls bound by fate and choice, and love powerful enough to tame even the wildest beast. And as Blackmore woke to another day, another chance to become something better than its brutal history, Seraphine Vale stood beside Kaylor Draven and knew with absolute certainty this was exactly where she belonged. Not as property, not as payment, not as some prize to be won or lost, but as an equal, a partner. A queen who'd chosen her monster king, and in doing so had proven that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand your ground when everyone else runs. The fortress bell tolled, calling warriors to their morning duties. Kaylor pressed a kiss to her temple and moved to leave, but Seraphine caught his hand. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For being a coward that first night, for trying to send me away, for fighting so hard to protect me from yourself." She smiled. "Because if you'd just claimed me without hesitation, we wouldn't have this. This understanding that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about choosing each other every single day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Kaylor stared at her like she'd just rewritten every truth he thought he knew. Then he pulled her close, buried his face in her hair, and whispered words only she could hear. "I choose you. Today. Tomorrow. Every day until my last breath. You're not just my mate or my queen. You're the reason I remember how to be human instead of just a weapon. The reason I believe healing is possible. The reason I think maybe, just maybe, I deserve something good after 20 years of darkness. So thank you, Seraphine, for staying, for fighting, for loving me when I couldn't love myself." They stood there wrapped in each other as the fortress woke around them, two people who'd survived the impossible and come out the other side transformed. Not perfect, not healed, not free from the trauma and darkness that had shaped them. Just better, stronger, together. And in a world built on survival and violence and fear, that was more than enough. That was everything. The sun climbed higher. The day began. And Seraphine Vale, once an Omega sold as payment for her father's debt, now queen of the most dangerous kingdom in 5 territories, smiled against her monster king's chest and thought, "We're going to be okay. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, we're going to be okay." The bond pulsed once in agreement, warm and certain and absolutely unbreakable. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, fear loosened its grip just enough to let hope take root. That was how empires were built, not through violence alone, but through two people deciding that love, messy, complicated, forged in fire love, was worth fighting for even when the odds seemed impossible. Especially when the odds seemed impossible, because that's when it mattered most. When darkness pressed in from all sides and the easy choice was surrender. That's when standing your ground and choosing love became an act of defiance. An act of war against everything that said broken people couldn't heal. An act of faith that maybe, just maybe, fate knew what it was doing after all. And as Kaylor Draven, the Butcher King of Blackmoor, held his queen and felt peace settle over his battle-scarred soul for the first time in 20 years, he finally understood what his father had never learned. True strength wasn't about suppressing darkness. It was about accepting it, integrating it, making peace with the parts of yourself you'd been taught to hate, and having someone beside you who loved you enough to stand in that darkness without trying to change it into light. Just accepting it as part of who you were, and loving you anyway, always.